All right, good evening. I'm calling to order our City Council regular meeting, Tuesday, October 4th, 2022. And I'll have our city clerk do a roll call.
Mayor Kelly Clark,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Amy Lamb,
Here.
Councilmember Karen Howe,
Here.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart,
Here.
Councilmember Kent Treen,
Here.
Councilmember Ratuja Indapure,
Here.
Councilmember Roisin O'Farrell. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to move that we excuse Councilmember O'Farrell from the meeting.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, 6-0. Councilmember O'Farrell is excused. And Councilmember Indapure, if you will do the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. Next up, we have our land acknowledgement. Do I have a volunteer to read that? Councilmember Howe? Yeah. It's on the back side of that. Yeah.
We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Great, thank you. Next, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, 6-0. The agenda is approved. Next, I'll move to public comment. I don't think we have anyone in the room, so I will move to Zoom.
If you wish to provide public comment, please raise your hand. For attendees who are joining by phone, please raise your hand by pressing *9. Okay, I have one commenter currently. I will promote her.
Good evening, Council. My name is Paula Harper Christensen, Sammamish resident since 1986. Thank you for placing attention to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because an inclusive society encourages all cultures, ethnicities, genders, and ages to be neighbors. Whether we're giving or receiving, each one of us has something valuable to bring to Sammamish, and that is what connects us. When we moved to this address 36 years ago, I was a young mom with a big family in a neighborhood full of children. We volunteered like crazy, advocating for safe streets, more soccer fields, coaching Little League, and welcoming groups into our home. Now we are members of the seniors, the retirees, who wish to participate more in our city's social, civic, and economic life, which in turn promotes active aging. Yesterday, I toured the new Edmonds Senior Center and kept asking myself, why not Sammamish? It was gorgeous. It was exemplary. And we have somewhere between 50 and 70% of the households that have no one under the age of 18 living in the home. After advocating for children and families, it's now time for our city to focus on the senior population, the baby boomers living here. We need a senior center too. The Edmonds Senior Center is is, as I said, it is exemplary, offering social and recreational programs, health and wellness programs, Medicare advisors, rotating art exhibits, lunch service at an open to the public restaurant, and a senior lunch program for the food insecure that is supported by the restaurant. Our federal government is clear. Senior centers are critical infrastructure and should be integrated into every community. While respect for seniors is healthy in most cities and communities, negative perceptions of aging still exist. Sammamish has a need to facilitate intergenerational interactions so we can continue our practice of inclusion and belonging right here. Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
I will now promote the next commenter. Mr. Stickney.
Good evening, City Council. Paul Stickney, Sammamish here. I'm going to steal a line from one of the two lecturers last night. His name was Clay Arango. I went to that Sustainability in Action at the Central Washington University. And I was expecting something average. It was extraordinary. The two speakers were just fantastic. And Clay Arango started his speech. I don't want to get you down into the dumps when I talk about this wicked problem, which is plastic in the environment. Well, I'm not going to call what I'm going to talk about a wicked problem, but it is a significant one. And that's the budget overall. I've been going to meetings now for almost 9 years, started in September of 2013, have watched through 4 budget cycles, and want to express some concerns on sort of a holistic note. Take a look at all these sorts of pieces that fit. We used to have, and we is the king's we, the city used to have $9 to $10 million in contingencies interspersed throughout the budgets, and those are gone. The general fund reserve was substantially higher, and it's being drawn down at a somewhat alarming rate. Overall taxes, although not giant, have been taken. The 10 years of bank capacity and 1% tax increases were taken in the last 2 years, where for the 9 to 10 years before that, the taxes were not taken. Overall revenues to the city in many areas, including, development, are lowered significantly. Our costs police this year, significant uptick of $4 million. East Side Fire and Rescue, $2 million. ADA has a lot of money needed, infrastructure things, stormwater programs, add-ons, staff. I did an interesting note. Back in 2013 and 14, the city had 72 full-time staff. If you add a Klahani equivalency factor, that would go up to 90. The question is 148 really needed, especially when our contracts don't seem to be going down? So again, I'm not trying to be, a down or negative, but I'm trying to look at the whole picture and the way it all pieces together. And it seems like we're off track. Too much spending, not enough income. Okay, appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
I believe we're going back to in-person comments.
Sounds good. I wasn't sure if we had any more on Zoom to finish up, so that's perfect.
I don't see any Zoom commenters.
Cool. Thank you. All right. First up, I have Monette.
Got it. Do I have to like start the timer or no? Okay. Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Manad. I've spoken to a lot of you before. I'm here with a letter from the Sammamish Youth Board. I do want to clarify that today I'm not going to be speaking on behalf of the Sammamish Youth Board, but I did want to introduce this letter to all of you from the Sammamish Youth Board. This is something that the Sammamish Youth Board did unanimously approve and is therefore, representing the views of the Sammamish Youth Board. This is also a letter. I printed out 2 copies, so I can hand these out to you guys later to read, and we're also going to send it in so that it's in public record for everyone to read. But basically, what youth in Sammamish have been asking for, not just in the Sammamish Youth Board, but beyond that, for a while now, has been we want a dedicated climate action plan in Sammamish. So as far back as January 2021, I believe, myself, as well as a couple other students from different high schools in Sammamish, have been in touch with city council members on the current council, as well as in the previous council who are now off the city council, about the public need and demand for some sort of sustainability master plan. Unfortunately, last year there was little progress in developing this as an independent project. There was a lot of talk about how there's already sustainability measures in the city comprehensive plan, as well as other initiatives such as focusing on things like forestry or other specific localized things that are restricted to the city of Sammamish. However, despite all of our conversations with city council members, many of whom, again, are not on the current council, we did fail to see any sort of commitment to a dedicated climate action plan. And the reason that we are looking for a dedicated climate action plan in Sammamish is because while there are other environmental initiatives in the comprehensive plan, for example, and other things the city is doing, we want to make sure that the city clearly outlines how it's going to achieve its climate goals, whether through the King County Cities for Climate Collaboration, or K4C, or other climate goals that the city has, because if the city is able to outline clear steps as to how they will reach that, as well as a general timeline of how they will reach that, we will first of all provide guidance to the city and the city council about immediate steps they can take and prevent the city from falling behind in reaching these measures. And maybe more importantly, it will also help the community to hold the city council and city staff, probably mostly city council, accountable in reaching these goals. So it ensures that there is a greater degree of public involvement in achieving these goals. Again, I can hand this letter out to you guys. We have over 130 signatures and counting. So right now, all the names of Sammamish residents and Sammamish students who have signed on to it so far are listed on the paper if you want to flip through that. But you'll definitely be hearing more from youth in Sammamish and other community members, not just students at local high schools, over the coming weeks. I believe there is a city planning and budgeting session coming up in November. So we want to make sure that you guys are aware of the need and the desire of Sammamish residents for a dedicated climate action plan. And we hope that City Council will represent Sammamish residents' views in developing one and implementing one, ideally before the end of the year and in 2023 and 2024 as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I hand this to you guys?
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, thank you.
I have 2 copies here, and I'll
Sweet.
Email one in.
Cool, thank you. Next up is Grace.
Okay, is this working? Hi, my name is Grace. I'm a high school student here at Eastlake in Sammamish. I'm here to be, because I'm advocating in support of this city climate action plan. I myself am a member of the Sammamish Youth Board, and I value the importance of this bill and how it will impact the future generations of Sammamish. I was pretty surprised to find out that Sammamish didn't have a climate action plan to begin with, while neighboring cities on the east side do. I mean, Issaquah, a city with 30,000 fewer people than Sammamish, does have a city climate plan, whereas we don't. And I think that was definitely something that was brought to mind that surprised me. I think that it's definitely very important to have this to implement in our community. Would hold accountability for Sammamish to have such a plan to try to match these values that many of you have towards the environment, because I know that a large goal of the city of Sammamish is to try to be very environmentally conscious. This lack of accountability will result in no change towards environmental sustainability in Sammamish if this isn't implemented. I think that a lot of kids in schools right now, high school, middle school, elementary school, are learning a lot about the environment and different consequences of it. And I think it'll definitely be beneficial towards them to know that there is being action taken in their local community for environmental sustainability. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have, mostly in support of the city climate plan, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have anyone else in the room? Yeah, you can go ahead. What's your name? Jake. Awesome.
I also want to ask, I said I had two, I don't know, did I hand you one? 'Cause I haven't heard one.
I do have one. Yeah, cool.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jake. I more just wanted to add on to what Manit was talking about because I am from Australia. I lived there for about 10 years of my life. I'm 17 currently. I moved back to the US last year, about a year and a half ago, and something that really, I suppose, almost blew me away to some extent was the wildfires that were happening in Australia. I don't think anyone in the world should be able to get somewhere like that. I mean, like, there's just a ton of, like, I suppose, issues with stuff getting like that. The fire was almost got to a point where it was almost the size of Texas. It was crazy. It went on for well over a year. There was a fair amount of time where we had to cancel schools and stuff over there. And I just think that stuff like that, because I don't know what the size of the fire is that's like near us, or it's bringing all the smoke that we have currently down to here, but I'm looking at, I suppose, just some things that might be able to be done for just like prevent stuff like that. And yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, anyone else? No? Okay. All right, we'll move back to Zoom if we have anybody.
Okay, I did not see any other commenters. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we'll move to presentations and proclamations. We actually have a presentation tonight. First, we'll do the two proclamations. First is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Do I have a volunteer or Kent? Where'd you, or you have it? Okay, cool.
Madam Mayor, are we doing the consent calendar?
Yeah, we could do that first. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, hold on 1 second. All right, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar first.
So moved.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
We
Still
actually
backing up.
have a last-minute scheduled executive session briefly that would come on the agenda prior to the consent calendar.
I did not read my email, I guess. Okay, my apologies. So first, backing up 2 steps, we will now enter an executive session under,
I believe it's under RCW 4230-110 sub 1I to discuss potential litigation, pending or potential litigation. Do we know the approximate duration, council?
10 minutes? Okay.
10 minutes, and do you know if action is anticipated afterwards? No, okay.
Sorry, I'm lost. Okay, yeah.
It's okay.
So
You're
I think
helping.
if we make it back at 7, yeah, cool. Thank you.
The council has extended the executive session to 7:10 p.m.
All right, thank you, everyone. Apologies for missing that and the consent calendar. So now I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been proven seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, 6-0, consent is passed. So next, I will have the proclamation, and you have the breast cancer one ready to go. All right.
So this is the proclamation from the City of Sammamish for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which is in October. So whereas a woman receives a diagnosis of breast cancer every 2 minutes, making this disease the most frequently diagnosed cancer amongst women in the United States, other than skin cancers, and whereas about 40,000 women and 500 men are expected to die from breast cancer annually in the United States, And whereas through research and advocacy, significant advances have been made in the fight against breast cancer, including an increase in 5-year relative survival rates for localized breast cancer from 74 to 98%. And whereas the 2.5 million breast cancer survivors living in the United States today are a testament to courage, as well as to the importance of promoting awareness about breast cancer, providing information, funding research, following recommended screening guidelines, and offering treatment to those who are affected. And whereas screening rates are declining, and a recent study reveals that amongst the 1.5 million studied over age 40 with health insurance, less than 50% receive the recommended annual screening. And whereas various organizations are spreading breast cancer awareness to both women and men through outreach, education, and screening programs, and have empowered women with the life-saving message of early detection and the importance of having annual mammograms. And the City of Sammamish would like to support and encourage those ongoing efforts on behalf of our citizens. And whereas throughout the month of October, women are encouraged to make a renewed commitment to the following recommended screening guidelines and to make a mammogram appointment. And whereas throughout October, organizations and health practitioners in this city are encouraged to use this opportunity to promote awareness about breast cancer and proper breast health, and to encourage annual mammograms. And whereas public officials and citizens of this city are urged to observe this month with appropriate activities and programs that encourage annual mammograms. Now, therefore, it be resolved that our Mayor, Kaylee Clark, and on behalf of the City of Sammamish and the Sammamish City Council, thereby proclaims October 2022 as Breast Cancer Awareness Month in the City of Sammamish. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Councilmember Howe, if you'll do the domestic violence awareness.
This proclamation is Domestic Violence Awareness Month for October 2022 in the City of Sammamish in recognition of the important work done by survivors, domestic violence programs, and victim service providers. We urge all citizens to actively participate in scheduled activities and programs sponsored by LifeWire and other community organizations to work toward the elimination of intimate partner violence. Whereas in just one day across the U.S. and its territories, nearly 75,000 victims of domestic violence sought services from domestic violence programs and shelters. That same day, more than 9,000 requests for services, including emergency shelter, housing, transportation, childcare, and legal representation, could not be provided because programs lacked resources to meet victims' needs. And whereas the impact of domestic violence is wide-ranging, directly affecting individuals and society as a whole, here in this community and throughout the U.S. and the world, and whereas racism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, and discrimination based on physical ability, nationality, or other factors help to perpetuate domestic violence and make finding safety even more difficult for some victims. And whereas the need for safe house continues to be rated as a survivor's most urgent need, and whereas Sammamish joins others across Washington and the nation in supporting victims of domestic violence, as well as local programs, state coalitions, national organizations, and other agencies nationwide who are committed to increasing public awareness of domestic violence and sending a clear message to abusers that domestic violence is not tolerated in Sammamish. And whereas domestic violence impacts millions of people each year, that it can be prevented, preventing domestic violence requires the collective voice and power of individuals, families, institutions, and systems, each whose #WeAreResilient adds a valuable and powerful component to transforming our communities. Now, therefore, Kaylee Clark, Mayor of the City of Sammamish, on behalf of the City Council, hereby proclaim October 2022 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Great, thank you. All right, next up we have a presentation from Eastside Fire and Rescue. We have Chief Jeff Clark and Ben Lane.
Good thing I have a lot of, oh, there we go. Now that sounds better. First thing I'd like to do is introduce Assistant Chief Ben Lane, who the EFR Board has already named as the next fire chief starting November 9th. So, Ben.
Thanks, Chief. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council, city staff, Ben Lane, Assistant Chief, and soon to be the fire chief. It's quite an honor and privilege to be here tonight. First off, to meet you all in person. I've had the honor to start my career in '94 and serve this area when it was Fire District 10 before it became a city. And so I've had the privilege to serve at every level within the organization. And I certainly look forward to the opportunity as a fire chief to continue to support the needs of the city of Sammamish. And most importantly, I'm looking forward to the opportunity 2 years from now to come back and present our 25 and 26 budget, which I'm going to learn from the expert here in just a few moments. So with that, thank you, and I look forward to getting to know you more in the future.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Nice move there. All right, so now on to the business that we're here for, and that's to talk about the 23-24 budget for EFR. So could I get the next slide, please? So just as a kind of a refresher of where we've been, the Finance and Administration Committee is a subcommittee of the EFR Board. What we do with our budgets is the EFR Board refers the budget typically in June, which is what happened this year, to the FAC. The FAC then endures a number of presentations from staff. We listen to the FAC members. They provide us with the information that they'd like more details on, and then we bring that back. And as you can see on this slide, the FAC met 3 times, which is typical. There is an option for an August meeting. In this case, they did not take that option. But we were able to answer the questions that needed to be answered. And then there were 5 recommendations that eventually need to be made. And then on October 13th at our board meeting, in order to pass the budget, there are 5 documents that need to be passed, and they're listed here. And I'm going to go in depth in each one of these throughout the presentation, so I won't dwell on them now. But I just wanted you to see the 5 independent motions that will be made in October and considered by the EFR Board in order to pass it. And that's our 3 main funds. There's the Equipment Replacement Fund, the Capital Facilities Fund, and then the large one is the Operating and Revenue Expense Fund. And then we also have to set an ambulance collection rate, which is one of our primary revenue sources. And then we ask for recommendations on what to do with any unfunded balance we may have at the end of the year. And we ask for commitments there, and we'll get into our projection on that as well. And the next thing I'd like to ask you is, just for my presentation style, if you have any questions along the way, please just let me know. It's much easier for me to answer them while we're on the topic. I can certainly come back afterwards if need be, but please just don't be shy, which I know none of you are. All right, next slide, please. All right, so first of all, the assumptions that the budget was created on in June, we assumed an 8% CPIW. Our labor contracts are tied to the June CPI, so the 9.5% that actually came out in June. After our June meeting, we had to adjust that because we assumed 8% and it came in at 9.5%. So we also assume a 4% CPIW for next June of 23, so that'll be for the 2024 budget year. It incorporates the wildfire mitigation program, which on the next slide I will go into in depth. That particular program was approved by the EFR Board back in the early part of this year. And again, I'll get into the details on the next slide. It also incorporates the Mobile Integrated Healthcare Program. I know many of you have sat with Jamie Formisano, our Deputy Director of Community Programs, and talked about our CORE program. Our CORE program is fully funded by the EMS levy. So while we did incorporate it into this budget, there's anything that we cut out of there would simply be cutting levy funds that we're receiving anyway. So that's pretty much a standalone program at this time, all funded by the EMS levy. And that EMS levy goes through 2025. At the end of 2025, that will have to be renewed by the county in order for that to continue. There were no new programs added outside of what's listed here. And then it fully incorporates the Woodinville contract revenue, which, as a reminder, the Woodinville contract is close to a $14 million contract that we started in October of last year, which was mid-biennium. All that we did from a budget perspective was adopt the 1 year, meaning for 2022, revenue and expense, but we did not necessarily book the revenue, and there is just over $1 million of revenue that is dedicated to offsetting your administrative costs as partners. towards this. So that got fully incorporated for the first time in this 23-24 budget. And again, I'll show you that in a few line item slides here in a minute. But those are the assumptions and the key elements of the budget as we move forward. Next slide, please. So first, the mobile integrate, or the wildfire mitigation program that was approved back in the early part of this year. And as you recall, well, those of you that were on council back at the end of last year, I came here for a presentation and we talked through it. Your members on the board, which are no longer with us, but your members that were on the board had in-depth conversations. We had at least a half dozen meetings at the board or the FAC level, the Finance and Administration Committee, over this program. How this impacts Sammamish is very unique because, as you know, you currently contract separately with Eastside Fire and Rescue for emergency management, all right? That contract started, I believe, 2 years ago in the beginning of 21. So we have the emergency manager is employed by Eastside Fire and Rescue. And then we have a number of deliverables through contract that we deliver for you through that emergency manager. That's what's on this list. It wasn't intended for you to necessarily read each of these, but this is cut and pasted from the current contract. What our wildfire mitigation program is hiring 2 more emergency management professionals, 1 wildfire mitigation specialist, and 1 analyst, administrative analyst, that can assist us with building a robust wildfire mitigation program to go out into the neighborhoods, into homeowners associations, neighborhood associations, community groups, service level groups, to prepare the community for wildfire. As we're seeing right now in northern King County, and this, what is about a 10,000 acre fire now, and all the nuisance we've been seeing from this for weeks now because of our dry weather, it's only going to become more prevalent. And this also gives us a couple of people to work through coordinating forest management. At the local level, we have 220 square miles of service area, much of which is wildfire interface. We have environmental concerns in order to manage a forest, and we have wildfire concerns. And unfortunately, sometimes the environmental concerns and the wildfire concerns do not match up. It is going to take a special kind of relationship with all of the entities that are involved in that to come forward with a plan in the years to come to properly manage our forests for wildfire prevention. Trust me, our forests are not managed right now at all for wildfire prevention as we dry out. Go ahead, sorry.
Thank you, Chief Clark. And so when I look at this, this summary of the different services that you'll be able to provide to us, I'm a little unclear on timing. So yes. I mean, a plan is great, but when would it be implemented? And how would we be able to understand how successful it's been? And I also, the second question to this, I can understand the need for additional headcount. I totally do. And just given finances and so forth, did you consider using contractors instead of FTEs?
Okay. So I'm going to get to your answers. I will answer those directly here in just a second. Let me finish first. So those 2 bodies will come in and assist in that deliverable. The concept was also to bring the emergency manager that you currently contract independently for into, now he's already at EFR, but bring him into the regular funding formula so that those 3 bodies can deliver emergency management. The list of deliverables that you have on your slide are the deliverables that you have under your separate contract. They would be under a separate contract now that we would still continue to deliver so that you still get all the same deliverables from an emergency management standpoint. But then from a wildfire standpoint, Karen, back to your question, is what tracking the activity and what I'm going to leave it up to that team, or in this case, Chief Lane as well. We will leave it to them to develop the plans on what we need to be doing for wildfire prevention. We are not reinventing a wheel here. This has been done in many states. Unfortunately, it just hasn't been done here yet. And those deliverables will be set up in a time frame through the executive team. And Jamie Formisano, our Deputy Director of Community Programs, would be leading this as far as guiding it and setting this up through a strategic plan specifically for that area. We'll work through exactly what the deliverables would be. Your question about how did we consider utilizing a contractor? No, we did not. The way that we established this was I see this as this is a several year, decade issue. We're not going to throw a program together and put it on a shelf and say this is good. This also includes evacuation plans for neighborhoods and keeping that up to date. This is something that's going to have to be like other emergency management functions. It needs constant attention and nursing and relationship building. If we don't put a constant, consistent pressure on this program, it won't prove successful in the years down the road, which is when we need it to be, considering climate change and everything that's going on around us. So a contractor, I just don't think would provide us that consistency over the long haul at that point. I understand the pressures on FTE and the economic pressures, but I think it really comes down to, is this an area of public safety that we want to put an effort into? It obviously was staff's recommendation that we do so. When we did the comprehensive dive into the program itself, when we worked through it as an EFR board, I would say that working through it, there was, I think I can say there was unanimous support for the merits of the program. It was about the how we set it up. This emergency management position was one of the sticking points that we talked through. We got to a place where, at the time, I thought everybody was happy with where we were moving forward. And now we're at a spot where what this is going to require moving forward is the funding within this budget, of course. And then we still will come back to you for your specific emergency management contract. Scott and I will have to work through an MOU that your council would have to approve. The MOU will contain the same deliverables that are on your screen for that emergency management. And if for whatever reason, EFR does not deliver on that deliverable, then we're not fulfilling our job to you, and which that would be counterintuitive to why we would provide that kind of service, right? We're going to deliver what we say we're going to deliver, as we have been with this contract all along. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. I do have just a slight follow-on, just saying, so has the planning started for the emergency management for Sammamish?
The emergency management deliverables on here have been getting delivered since last January.
Okay, so
a year ago.
They're in so they're in process. You're not waiting for anything.
No, from an emergency management standpoint, no. We are currently recruiting the 2 wildfire prevention positions. Once those are filled, the wildfire prevention planning and work will commence then. But everything on this screen has been getting delivered and has been delivered since, well, even before January when Andrew was here as a member of the city of Sammamish, but has continued to be delivered, and you have met everything through there.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Any other questions on that?
Yes, well, I got one.
Oh.
Chief Park, this is Councilmember Treen, and under 1.4.4 hazardous identification and vulnerability analysis, is that going to be a part of the MOU for the wildlife or the wildfire guy? Because I just look at it as, welcome to Sammamish, we live on the top of a plateau. So unlike some of our other cities, we have a different situation here topography-wise. And is that why the need for this analysis and a kind of unique emergency management professional to be added? Is that why we're doing this?
Well, the main impetus behind the program is wildfire mitigation. We're doing that because of the threat to the entire service area. You are correct that Sammamish has some very unique features. The hazardous identification and vulnerability analysis is a standard piece of any emergency management plan that would be conducted. But in your case, in Sammamish, it will be unique for a number of reasons. Number one, that you're up on the plateau and isolated. You're basically, I could call it a sky island. You have very few evacuation routes. Which means you have very few ways in and very few ways out, and very few emergency resources on the plateau and even around the plateau on the overall scale of things. So that would all be part of the analysis. And whether we do wildfire mitigation or not, that analysis has been done and will continue to be done and updated as things change here on the plateau and in the other service areas.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor.
Okay.
My question was just around the evacuation time study. Will we be seeing that soon? I saw that the timeline was we would be seeing it sometime this month, and I wasn't sure if that's still the schedule.
Great question. I am not sure where he's at right now with that. I do know that he has been working on it, and it should be soon, but I'd say it's October 5th, and I would not say that it's going to be this month, would be my guess. But we will have it by the end of the year, I'm sure, if he listed it as a deliverable at the end of this month. He's on vacation till the next week, so I can get an update to you once he returns.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember DePuy?
So
I'm glad
for
I'm not the only one that forgot my mic.
Yeah, but you have a loud enough voice that you don't need one. So we have the one dedicated emergency personnel
Yes.
with EFR, and the 2 new headcounts that you've requested. Is that going to be just for Sammamish, or is that going to be for all the areas that EFR covers?
Great question. So it's going to be for all the areas that EFR covers, and in the way that we're reformatting the emergency manager that Sammamish currently has, that will be for all areas that Sammamish covers as well, or that EFR covers as well. But we will still maintain all of the deliverables that Sammamish needs that are on the screen above. So all 3 positions will be for everybody. And this is taking, much like we've regionalized the fire service, this regionalizes the emergency management and wildfire mitigation process for across all of the partners. Going back to when the emergency management contract was first moved over to EFR, one of the visions, the shared visions that was part of that was the possibility of regionalizing emergency management. At the time, what North Bend calls Snowmageddon had recently happened prior to that, when it was kind of all hands going out towards the North Bend area to help them with the, 10, 12 feet of snow that they received in a few hours. So it's about how we share each other's resources, because when these emergencies happen, it's going to happen to everyone. And even evacuation, if you create evacuation plans in Sammamish on your own, and you don't consider the evacuation plans that are going on around you, you may all be evacuating directly into each other. So regionally, it's important to plan that way. Same with wildfire mitigation. So the plan is to regionalize this, and in your case, with East Side, we cover all of the areas with the exception of your border with Redmond. And we do work with Redmond, of course, but it would truly regionalize much of the impacts around your borders and what the resources are coming in. Okay, you're welcome.
Councilmember Howe?
I just love talking with you. I just have to ask another question. Would it be reasonable to ask for getting a emergency management update at our EFR meetings on a regular basis? Because I think that would be tremendous.
Yeah.
To just let us know just how things are going, and if there's hiccups or challenges, to get them exposed there so that we can bring it back to council. Absolutely.
No, I actually, I welcome that, and the updates that the EFR board members specifically wish to see. What would warm my heart is being able to say something in EFR and knowing that it gets out to all 5 boards that say it. And usually what happens, and it's not just in Sammamish, but it's other places too, I'll run into an elected official and, oh, I didn't know we were doing that. And inside, I smile and I answer, here's what we're doing. But inside, I say, well, we talked about it a year ago now, whatever. But no, we would love to do, I would think the proper cadence for something like that would be, say, quarterly. But if we had a quarterly update.
That'd be awesome.
And if there was something written and then somebody there for verbally to answer any questions, we can certainly provide that. I can commit the next fire chief to that, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's no problem.
Yeah.
I knew he would be. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you for the suggestion and welcoming that. It's time, right, in the meeting and how we want to spend our time. And if talking about ourselves is something we can do. We don't mind that. All right. Any other questions on emergency management or wildfire mitigation? Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so now we'll dig into the budget a little bit more in earnest. So the expense update. So this just shows the 3 renditions that the FACT saw. And you'll see that what we presented in July is the same as what we presented in September. We just moved some things around. We cut what we could out of supplies and services. to accommodate some of the personnel costs, but they're still within the parameters of the first slide that I showed you. So of significance, of course, this is about $14 million more than what our last overall budget would have been, but that's because of the addition of Woodinville. Okay, next slide, please. And this breaks here on the revenue, it breaks down. I'm going to take the opportunity here to explain how our funding works on a very high level. Okay, this is the most complicated funding formula I have ever come across at EFR. Last 2021, the EFR board dug into the funding formula. There were partners who were saying we'd like to examine whether or not we should update some of it or change parts of it. We did a comprehensive review at the EFR board, and the board members decided after conversation, after analysis, that there was nothing to change. So we did not change it. But the first thing we do is we determine non-partnership revenue, all right? And in this year, because of the Woodinville contract, so look at the 2023 column, we'll go down there. We have things like our King County EMS levy, that first $2.5 million. We've got $3.4 million in ambulance revenue. And those were normal revenue things that we shared as partners, okay? Then the Woodinville Fire and Rescue contract comes into play. The actual contract cost for that, again, I'm going to use round numbers, is somewhere around $12.9 million. And then there's $1 million of administrative overhead costs, which helps you with the overhead that we have on the existing partnership, which acts as new revenue to you from a budgetary standpoint, okay? So then we have a contract with the Snoqualmie tribe there. You'll see that that's flat at $354. When you actually look at the funding formula in their contract, it's very similar to the funding formula that I'm going to get into here in a minute. But they are actually performing well. One of the incentives that we have for the Snoqualmie tribe is we wanted to go there less because we were going there a lot. Their call volume year over year is dropping. They're actually doing mitigation things, and they're working through that with the staff that they have, and they're not calling us as much, which means there's not as much cost. So that's one of the reasons that their contract has been flat. And then we have miscellaneous cost recovery, and I'd have to have the finance folks tell you what that is. But we've got a contract with Mercer Island, for instance, and several small contracts that total up to that $500,000. And then we come to a grand total of non-partnership revenue of $21.3 million. We then simply deduct that from our expense, which was that 49.3 at the bottom, and that fifth line up from the bottom shows what our partner revenue is. So we need $28 million from the partners this year. That then goes into this most complicated funding formula I've ever seen. So to really bring it down to basics, basically it is calculated 85% on assessed valuation of the properties that exist within Sammamish and 15% of your emergency call volume for fire calls. Okay, there's a complicated formula that goes into that because we break it down by response station. So for instance, if you have a station that serves Sammamish and Issaquah, the assessed valuation of the properties within that response area and the call volume within that response area are split between those partners in order to come up with the actual cost, which is the very complicated piece to it. But generally, the easiest way for me to explain this to folks is 85% assessed valuation on property. So when property valuations go up, your percentage can go up and within the partnership, and then call volume, emergency call volume. So if your emergency call volume goes up, which all of our partners have trended up, but more importantly, when it goes up or down in relation to the other partners is what's going to impact what you pay year to year, okay? So next slide, please. So this gets into the funding formula distribution. That 85-15 that I explained, and let's start with the first column in 2014 through 18, resulted in those percentages that you see there, and we'll use Sammamish in that time frame, was 31.61% of the overall operations of the partner revenue, not the non-partner, but the partner revenue is what Sammamish paid, okay, based on that 85-15 formula. Then in 19 through 22, we updated the contract, and the simple thing is, hey, in order to keep up with this, the assessed valuation and the call volume need to be updated from time to time. Well, that 2014 through 2018 timeframe, the AV and call volume were locked in 2012 and 2013 numbers, okay? So everything stayed the same. We changed that. Just for fairness, we changed that, and when I say we, I mean the EFR board, through all of the city councils and fire commissions, approved that every 2 years, through our 2-year budget cycle, we would update the assessed valuation and update the call volume distribution in order to reset these percentages. So we redid that in 2019, and then again now this year, which will go into effect January 1st of 2023, we've reset that. And the top table shows you the trends of the 3 times that we've done that and what's happened to Sammamish in that. The first time when it happened in 2019, you benefited, you paid a smaller percentage of the overall partnership. This time, it's impacting you more because you're going to pay a higher percentage based on the AV and the call volume specific to your jurisdiction in that as it relates to that formula. 2 years from now, when Chief Lane is up here presenting the next budget, these numbers will have changed again. We don't know until we see assessed valuation and call volume in relation to each other in the partnership where that's going to end up. Okay.
Just a quick question around call volume. Are all calls created equal? So if I make a call for 911, for example, versus like if Jamie is doing something with Core Connect, how does that work?
So there's 2 types of calls that are characterized. One is an emergency medical call and one is a fire incident. An EMS call is a 1-for-1. One service unit gets applied. If there's a fire call within your jurisdiction, there's a 3-to-1. So it basically counts as 3 calls, and that's across everything. The Core Connect, those calls do not count against you in this formula. They're off on the side over here. Although most of those are generated from an EMS call. But
right. But
yes,
thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely. We have done nothing from counting calls that has changed over the years. It's always been EMS and fire. We haven't added categories or spiked by any other service level that comes in. Okay. Any other questions on that? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So when you said, for example, if the same fire station is serving Issaquah and Sammamish, and it's split, so it's not split 50-50, right? How does that split work?
So if in a different presentation, I have the maps that actually show, they go in there through county GIS data, and we look at each parcel of land in Sammamish, and every parcel is assigned to the closest fire station. If the closest fire station is in Issaquah, then that assessed valuation is being assigned to Issaquah, and that means that for that Issaquah station, that property, Sammamish is getting billed for it, basically, right? Same thing happens in reverse. If there's any Issaquah stations if there's any areas of Issaquah that a Sammamish fire station responds into, then Issaquah is paying that part of Sammamish, or District 10. So there was a big change that happened for Sammamish, which predates a lot of this, but actually it's in the 2014 through 2018 timeframe. When you took on Klahani, that was all Fire District 10. And all of that switched, which really drove up the percentage here. It switched it from D10 to Sammamish. But there used to be a lot more crossover there between District 10 and Sammamish. But you do have some border areas that affect District 10 along the 202 area. So, but for the most part, it's Issaquah and Sammamish where you see that sharing of resources.
And then the difference between the assessed value, so is it like a property assessed value?
Yes.
So if the prices in Sammamish are going up way higher, then the percentage that we would incur would be higher than Issaquah.
Yes,
potentially.
It would all be yes, correct. And it's in relation to what's happening with the other partners. So on this slide, North Bend also went up a fair amount here. And in their particular case, the North Bend property values went up a little higher than Issaquah and Sammamish did as a whole, as a community. So that's going to impact them in this formula, as it will impact you in relation here. So if your values were to start to go down, good, bad, or indifferent, there are a number, I would suspect, although I know in Sammamish, your tax base is heavily property tax. The same AV that you're using for that is the AV that we're using to calculate in this formula. Assessed valuation is a very common thing in the state of Washington for taxing. So we're using the same data that you use for your other taxes.
And so my last question. In this slide, and I think the following too, Sammamish pays the most highest percentage, it seems like. So what's the reason behind that?
So, well, the reason behind it are those 2 factors. It's assessed valuation and call volume. You are the from an assessed valuation, so you have the highest valued property overall in the partnership, and your call volume, which actually for a city your size, your call volume is relatively low, but that coupled with your call volume puts you at that percentage. If your call volume was to drop or your AV were to drop, then and everyone else stayed the same, then you would see your percentage go down moving forward. But something that's important, and I don't have slides here today for this, but something that's important to keep in context. Woodinville is a great example for you. Sammamish is, I'm going to use round numbers again, 60, 65,000 people, served by 3 fire stations. All right, Woodinville is about, Woodinville Fire District is about 30,000 people served by 3 fire stations. All right, they pay $14 million a year for fire service. You're paying $9.2 million a year for fire service. Okay, and when we've done these comparisons in the years for all of our partners. When you look at like for like, you have to remember, and in 1999 is when you realize the benefit of this regionalization, and it's continued. But when you look like for all of our partners, whether you're a 2-person or 2-station system, 1-station system, 3-station systems, what you are paying in relation to other King County jurisdictions that serve the same, you are paying far less thanks to your foresight to get into a regional system. And as complicated as this funding formula is, it would be a lot easier for me to just assess a tax and put it out there for AV like a fire district does. It's easier to calculate, easier to explain to people, but as complicated as this funding formula is and the way that it's come down to the proportion, it has worked for 20-some years for the partners. And Sammamish for those years was always one of the top 3. When you took Kalahani on, you became solidified as the top 1 because of the property value you took on and the call volume there. You're welcome. Any other questions on that piece? Okay, next slide, please. All right, so the next three or four slides here are simply to show you the history. So total partner contributions is a total of 3 numbers. It is the expense fund or our operating fund, which is the big one, the equipment replacement fund, and the capital facilities. When you total those, that's what really matters to you as a jurisdiction. What are you paying in total, okay? So when you look at 2023, that's $9.2 million, okay? And when you look over our since 2019, this trend line above shows the percentage of total partner contribution and what the impact of the partners have been. In 2021, which was the year post-COVID, there was a demand from all of our partners to stay as flat as possible and minimize, because we were all setting up for what was looking forward. So that's when you see the negative 4.68%. Part of what came from that is we froze equipment replacement and capital facility payments, and we used what end fund balance we have to make payments there. And in actuality, it's been a total of 3 years now that we have not had partners make equipment replacement or capital facility fund payments. The 2023 number of 10.55% reflects re-engaging the equipment replacement fund and capital facilities fund, which is something for all of the board members that were on the board back in 20 and 21 and the city managers and finance directors. We said, we're taking these payments away, and actually started in 2019 in some respect, but we said when it comes back, it's going to hurt a little, right? Well, if you take into account, that impact is about 4.4% of the 10.5%, okay? The actual operating fund impact that increased was 6.13%, I believe, is the actual percentage that your operating fund went up. Next slide, please. I think is operating fund, right? Yes, 6.13, I remember properly. So the actual operating fund, and again, this is people, this is stuff, this is where all of our heavy costs are. So your actual operating fund in 2023 is going up 6.13%. Now, for Sammamish, when we get to it, because that funding formula changed, your percentage is going to be higher, but that, again, is a different issue. This is the overall operating fund just for EFR as a whole. The 6.13%, what we've actually done there, I'm actually pretty proud of the EFR for doing, is in 2021, there was a 6.3% COLA. We only had budgeted at the time 2.5%. When we went to our mid-buy, we understand we had to absorb the remainder of that. That was when inflation really first started. It peaked really bad this year, right? We hope it peaked this year at 9.5%. But while your operating costs are going up 6.13%, we've actually captured over 15% of COLA, which is 85% plus of our budget, which is people. 15% increase over the last two years there. This is actually a very good reflection. One of the reasons we were able to do that was new revenue, like the Woodinville contract, like the Mercer Island contract. We were able to bring in new revenue that helped offset your costs as partners because we were able to expand and take care of that. If we had not brought on those contracts, then as a partnership, even though our overall budget, I'm guessing, is going to be down, would be down around $35 million, your overall share, you'd be up another 1.5 million as a overall partnership spread across that formula, paying more. Okay, so, and then this also demonstrates that next year in 2024, a 1.59% increase. So trying to keep that as flat as possible. Hopefully that's one of the benefits of a 2-year budget as well. And so far we've seen that. Next slide. This represents the equipment replacement fund re-engaging in 2023. So you can see the 3 years that we didn't pay it. Next slide, please. Capital facilities. One little nuance here is that there's actually part of the end fund balance, when I get to that here in a minute. If the EFR board adopts the end fund balance strategy that was recommended by the FAC, we will not be making this payment in 23 or 24. It's a very small payment of $75,000, but these would be zeroed out. And that would, those portions, that 23.7 would be deducted from that overall number that you're paying, assuming that gets approved. Next slide, please. And then partner contributions. This is a standard summary that we show our board on a fairly regular basis. So you can see the individual impacts to the budget that we just went through. And again, these are the things that we just talked through. And that that 10.5% average for EFR, you see you're paying 11.77% of that because of the formula change. North Bend is up at 19% because of their formula change. And they understood it, as they explained to me, that they knew their AV was going up significantly with whatever development they've had over the last 2 years. And then the next slide shows 2024, which shows it flat, as flat as we could keep it at that 1.67. Next slide. Okay, so that really concludes the 3 areas of the budget, okay? So one of the recommendations, that actually contained 3 of the recommendations that the EFR board will be considering. 1 is the equipment replacement fund, 2 is the capital facilities fund, 3 is the operating and expense fund, okay? The 4th one is the ambulance rate discussion. The rates that you see up here was what we initially demonstrated to the partners as what we currently pay. What the King County average is. In 2020, we did a very comprehensive review, and we did raise rates 28% as an EFR board, and that's actually the first time that we established as a board that every budget cycle we would approve the ambulance rates, even if they stayed flat, we would approve the ambulance rates as a board. Next slide, please. And how we changed it was we originally, you can see the numbers that I crossed out there. Originally, staff recommended those. We met with the FAC, and we came back to the next FAC meeting with this revised recommendation. Basically, you can see the CPIW that was considered, which is basically 15.8%. We recommended just moving our transport rate from the 1,050 to 1,100 per transport, which puts us at the top with 2 other King County fire departments. AMR, anytime that AMR transports outside of a contracted rate, which is in Seattle and most unincorporated areas of King County, they're charging $1,550. So we're still well below the private sector. But then upping the mileage from where we were at to the 2259, which captures full CPIW because of the cost of fuel, and we don't see the cost of fuel regulating itself anytime soon. So that will generate about $52,000 more in our revenue. So it's a nominal increase, but we think it's being responsible. And this is what was recommended from the FAC moving forward to the board next week.
Do you know what your bad debt expense is?
Great question. We do. I don't sit in here today. It's in every EFR board packet. I would say, let me correct that. 90% of the time we have write-offs, ambulance write-offs, which total at the bottom. Not every month do we make the report, do we get it done on time, but most months we do. The majority, I would say 35 to 40%, which is fairly typical. So for instance, private insurance companies, we usually get full freight or something close to it. But when it comes to Medicaid, we get about 30%. Medicare is about 30%. Medicaid is even less. But now Medicaid, we have a supplemental program called GEMT, Ground Emergency Medical Transport Program, which actually we get in the qualified GEMT expenses, we get in the neighborhood of about $8,000 per transport, thanks to this program, yes. And it's for government programs only. We entered into a contract for that in 2018. In 2017, there was enabling legislation from the state of Washington. We started the program in the first year in 2018, and we have seen that's paid dividends in that $3.4 million non-partner revenue line. Probably $1 million of that is GEMT revenue. But still, our write-offs are going to be between 35 and 40%. And you're not going to improve that in the industry under the current makeup of healthcare in the United States. It's not a system that is designed to get full cost recovery from the federal programs, for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide. All right, and then the last piece that will be approved by, or asked to be considered and approved by the EFR board is the end fund balance projection. In a nutshell, we look at what our expenses are, and we look at what funds we have coming over. Our first priority for end fund balance is maintaining a 10% operating reserve. That's basically cash on hand, so that's the $4.9 million that you have listed there. Our second priority is up the second line, which is maintaining a fully funded liability fund. This is a percentage that's set out in our director board policy of vacation time, sick leave time, and anticipated retirements. So it is basically roughly $2.1 million that you see there is set aside for unanticipated and anticipated vacation leave payouts, sick leave payouts, and unexpected retirements and the costs associated with replacement. We fully fund both of those before we identify any available end fund balance. And again, that's by board policy, which you can look up online anytime you're bored and you want to read some policy. Right now, we're anticipating that at the end of the year, we'll have about $1.1 million of that available ending fund balance. Next slide. When we initially ran these numbers, it was significantly higher. I'm going to say another $1 million higher, as my recollection goes. But we gave the board or the FAC some recommendations of what they could choose to do with that end fund balance. I've crossed out the two items that the FAC either did not consider or just because of what our anticipated fund balance is, we just can't afford at this point. But what we can afford is setting aside a grant match for PFAS, which is the forever chemicals, and a spill that we currently have at our spill location that we have for years of training at our current headquarters building of $750,000. We have a grant request through the Model Toxic Care Act. Care Act, it's not CARE. Control Act, thank you. CARE is a different funding line. But MOTCA for short. We've got a grant in with the Department of Ecology that they will consider for the 23-24 year. This $750 represents a 25% match for that grant. So if we get the grant, then we would have the $750 set aside in order to get that work done. The grant that you see crossed out right under that is we have anticipated with our consultant what our 25-26 would be. Ideally, that grant actually represents what would close out our site. If our alpha testing that we're doing right now on a concept works out, we could actually fund it with this $2.5 million match. If DOE did award the full grant in that biennium, then we could actually be done with that project on that particular site, which would be ideal. But we'll worry about that one in 2 years. Again, Chief Lane will have a strategy for you on that, I'm sure. And then, so we are recommending, the FAC has moved forward and recommended that we set aside $750 of that end fund balance for the grant match. If the grant doesn't come through, that money, I don't have the approval to go spend this money on anything else. It sits on there until the EFR board considers it and decides what to do with it in the future. And then lastly, reducing the capital facilities and maintenance fund payments, 150, that totals the 75,000 for both 23 and 24, which is what I noted earlier. So that is what's currently being recommended. Yes, that only totals about 900,000. That leaves 200,000 in end fund balance. All that means is it sits there until another need comes up that the EFR board would approve. But more than likely, it'll just go to the mid-buy next year, coupled with hopefully some other end fund balance, either from expenses that weren't spent or new revenues or revenues that were unanticipated come in, and the board as a whole will consider it at that time. And I think that is the last slide. I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have.
All right, Council, you have any questions? Councilmember Napuri?
Two general questions.
Yes.
Sorry that I'm asking them. I know we talked a little bit about mileage. Is there a move towards going to electric vehicles, like for ambulances or even?
Yeah, another great question. So we demonstrated an electric fire engine for our board and for our staff about 3 years ago now. And our board at that time directed us that in the future, once the electric technology catches up, to do what we can to bring those into our fleet. Currently, there are a few large departments that are trying out the electric engines. I got to admit to you, I've never driven an electric vehicle myself. That engine was so fast and so quiet, it scared me to death how quiet it was, actually. But it was very functional. The only question around them in our industry right now is how long will the batteries last for the longer emergencies that we respond on. But the technology is catching up, so I think it's getting there. And the other issue is, an engine right now costs between $600,000 and $700,000. An electric engine costs between 1.1 and 1.2 million. So it's a significantly higher upfront cost. There are several savings in maintenance over the long haul, but there's still going to be an engine on it and moving parts in the pump, which break down frequently. So there still will be some mechanical costs. So long answer, but yes, we are evaluating. We're not there yet where we have those programmed into our equipment replacement fund. The industry is just now deploying them out in some of the larger cities. We'll see what happens from there. And hopefully, as the demand goes up, like others, the cost will come down to where we'll be able to start implementing those in. And then as far as electric vehicles go, certainly for staff cars and whatnot, we have been asked for our future capital considerations like future stations and at headquarters to consider electric charging vehicles, and then doing what we can to move our staff vehicles to electric as time and money allows.
That's a good point. And then because you talked about personnel, and that's probably the major cost, right? Has it been, as with all other industries, has it been hard to retain and recruit firefighters? And my second question was, when you said you have a fund set aside for, like people taking time off or long leaves, do you account for like when firefighters go and fight wildfires as well during wildfire season?
Yes, not from that fund, but yes, to answer your questions in reverse, yes, we do account for the wildfire, and we get reimbursed for that. We just have to have the cash on hand to take care of it now, and sometimes it takes up to a year to get reimbursed, but we've got that system down pretty good. As far as personnel retention, on the staff side, the non-sworn side, yes, recruiting is very, very difficult and very competitive. Even for the wildfire mitigation spots, it's going to be challenging to get people in. We see some recruitments where, like currently we've had a fire prevention, so an assistant fire marshal open. We get one application in at a time. We do an interview. We actually made a job offer, and he decided not to come after going through getting very late into the stages. But he was the only interview we had. We leave it open, and as soon as someone drops the packet, we'll screen them. So that's difficult. On the firefighter side, we still have an awful lot of people applying. To be candid, our biggest issue in the fire service, like many industries, is DEI and getting the right candidates and breaking down the barriers so that we reflect the communities we serve. We have made tremendous strides in hiring a more diverse workforce that is much more reflective of our communities that we serve, but we still have a lot of work to do. And one of the areas that, even in my retirement, I will continue to work on is this issue in the fire service alone. It would be nice to see this. Right now, I'm looking at a pretty rare city council right now with the gender flip, basically. I'm used to talking to a board of white males, not a diverse board of females. But 50% of our workforce should really be female. And I don't know, we've got quite a ways to go. I'm going to guess that we're probably up to about 11%, 12% of our workforce is female, which when I arrived here 7 years ago, there was one female on the entire workforce. Our staff is doing a wonderful job with that, but it's the barriers to entry that get in the way, that we're doing an awful lot of work, not just at Eastside, but regionally. I'm very proud of how Eastside staff has dove into this subject, and we have a DEI committee internally that's not only helping us internally with the issue, but on recruitment, and it's making a world of difference. So we're getting there a little at a time, and I think that's actually helping our recruitment from the standpoint of the numbers we're getting on the sworn side. So not, again, I'm long-winded, but we are not seeing the challenge of getting people in the door. It's about going and finding the right people to get our demographics where we want them to be, except when it comes to our staff position, which is about, there's probably 30, there's around 30, 35 staff positions. Those positions are very difficult to recruit for, like most cities are seeing with their staff folks as well. You're welcome.
Is anyone else? I see Councilmember Stewart's mic on. Oh, okay. No, I didn't know. And I guess lastly, I mean, it's going to be Ben's problem anyway, so yeah, I think that's like a good summation of the presentation. All right, do I have any other questions? I really appreciate this. This is awesome.
Anytime. Thank you. It's really
Super
nice to come to
helpful.
a meeting in person and see you all in person again. I've missed this over the last 2 years. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, thank you for your service. I mean, I'll see you probably next week, I guess, but still.
I hope so. Yeah, we'll see you
Thank
next
you.
week.
Yes.
Hey, Chief, you got to stop grinning so big when you come up and talk about retiring next month. It's.
I'm always happy. There's no change here.
All right. Next, we will move to public hearings. I believe Audrey will be popping up.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. I will share my screen in a minute, but first I'll begin with some introductions. I am Audrey Starcy, Interim Public Works Director, and thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council for listening to our final presentation for the Stormwater Capital Improvement Program. This is something that has evolved over the last few months, and we really appreciate all the feedback that we have received to date. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so this evening, as you can see, we've had quite a few council meetings about this subject. We intentionally went to develop our capital program along with our stormwater rates study, which is an update for you in our next item on the agenda. All of those 2 items have actually been done in parallel with the budgets. There's been a lot of moving pieces, but that was done intentionally so that we could capture the best level of service for the community. In prior presentations, we have brought 3 levels of service up for Council's consideration. The Stormwater Capital Plan that you'll be viewing tonight is reflected on the enhanced level of service. And the goal for tonight was just to close the public hearing and receive any final input and feedback. And then we'll be back on October 18th with the final capital plan, and we'll ask for Council to adopt that plan. I've previously gone over this, so I'll just kind of glide through this slide, but we did want to make sure that both Council and the public knew that we did review projects that went into the Stormwater Capital Plan list by going through several comprehensive plans, our Stormwater Comprehensive Plan and our City Comprehensive Plan, all of our completed basin plans and our prior Stormwater Capital Plans, our 2021 Stormwater Retrofit Study, and our transportation projects. There's some stormwater allocation in those projects as well. And of course, actually a lot of our projects have come from drainage complaints and requests from the community, as well as maintenance concerns identified by our team. There are 2 components to the plan. The main component is the draft PDF of the Stormwater Capital Plan. That was intentionally done to provide a very clean document that is easy to digest and read. Accompanying the plan is our program and project guide. In that guide, it details every project and program listed on the plan, as well as provides the intended comprehensive goal or objective that the project intends to fulfill. We've had a very few updates to the plan, so I just wanted to make sure that I brought those to your attention this evening. So thank you for the public comment received for Stormwater Capital Project SW601. That is the 212th Avenue flooding at the Zacchaeus Headwaters wetlands. The location has been corrected in both the plan and in our program guide. We have added an additional program to the project list for our SW500 program. That program includes projects that typically have a planning level estimate of between $50,000 and $300,000. So that project was added to that list. And we updated our project amounts for both the Lewis Thompson Road Tightline project, as well as the stormwater allocations for transportation projects. This slide represents our consolidated list of projects and programs. And before we close the hearing, I just wanted to see if there were any quick questions and that I could answer about the plan or how we arrived at the plan.
Great, thank you. All right, council. The first question is, was that the entire presentation?
That was the entire presentation. I can bring it back up if you'd like. That was the whole thing.
Yeah, can you do that one more time?
Sure.
I'm just kidding. All right, Councilmember Howe?
Be heard by anyone. Okay. Thank you, first of all, for putting this all together, and thank you for making it so clear. I do appreciate that a lot. One of the questions I popped to you late this evening, of course, knowing full well that you'd never have time to even look at the question, much less be able to answer it, but it does have to do with Tamarack. So if I could get some more information around that. Have we ever worked on stormwater improvements on private land? Or is this an unusual and unique circumstance?
That is a great question. I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. I would need to confirm with our team and get back to you. Typically, cities tend to work on their own assets that are in our right-of-way or that we already have easements for, but I would need to go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, and I suspect not, simply because it would be precedent setting, but I don't know that. But it would be interesting to understand. And is there any other circumstance that is similar to what Tamarack is experiencing?
I guess, could you elaborate on what
What
you
I mean is, are there any other private property areas that are experiencing something that they want the city to fix?
Not that we are aware of. I believe this neighborhood, consisted of a private drainage system and private roads. So,
Okay. So it's unique, potentially. Yes. Okay. And the other thing that I noticed from some of the public comment is that there were definitely comments relating to the fact that, that area built up. There were, I think, probably it sounded like there may have been mistakes being made about what got permitted, how many homes, and so forth. So there may be more pressure on the stormwater system now than there would have been prior when that development was first put in. I also wonder, doesn't the downstream effect have an impact in that I believe there's septic tanks on that system in that neighborhood. So as stormwater is pushed down to Lake Sammamish, doesn't that impact everybody below them?
We would need to probably do a little bit of analysis on that. I know that this area was looked at with the Zacchaeus Basin Plan in quite a great detail. So it would depend on, I guess, if the septic system in the field is functioning as it should. Hopefully that is not actually reaching the surface water system, but we would need to probably do a little bit more research into that. It's a great question.
Okay, because it's just a really difficult situation, of course, for the residents that are there. Did we do some kind of mitigation for them? Was there some channels that were put in with rocks or something like that to help with stormwater drainage?
I need to go back and take a look at kind of the history of that area. I believe there was some temporary work that was done, but I would want
That's
to go
what I
back
think
and
too,
make sure,
because I seem to remember that. is that it sounds like the cost to fix something like this, there was an estimate of the $400,000 range. Is that remotely accurate?
That was identified as a high level planning level cost in the ZACU Basin Plan, I believe is ZACU's Project 1. You'll see, and I think it was on page 216 of the plan. And my understanding of that, it was a short-term temporary fix to help with the conveyance and ditch system that is currently located on private property. The challenges of that are listed in that particular project. And it was not moved forward on the capital plan because it's located on private property.
Right. Well,
and privately maintained.
Because where I'm trying to kind of balance things, not kind of in the same way that Chief Clark was talking about the balance and a portion of payment and so forth. And I wondered if we'd ever approach the residents there with, you know, the problem is 60% our fault or 60% their fault or whatever, but that there's a balanced way to approach this potentially, where with entities that pony up and pay in is a shared project, as opposed to all 100% responsibility on the residents. So it's a question. I'm not expecting you to have an answer to that, okay? I'm just thinking of how to get ourselves out of where we are and to move from having the residents be justifiably upset by what's going on there and move into some kind of project that actually makes sense. And I have no idea if anyone else feels the same way that I do about this. But I'd love to find a solution that is not, well, we should look at this, and then we don't do anything. And again, this isn't on you at all, not even remotely. This is me trying to figure it out and see if there's a way to explore options that would give us a way to move forward on this. And with that, I'll yield the floor.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Howell, my recommendation would be that we all maybe have some small group meetings. There's a rich and long and storied history, and there are options, but there's a lot to cover there. So maybe we should kind of dive into some of that and get everybody caught up, and then we can probably move forward from there. My question to you, Audrey, and I've asked you this in email, and I just kind of want to put it out there. One, thank you for all the work. There's a lot to do. The stormwater retrofits, I think, are really important. And yet, I still have concerns. It's been my experience, albeit brief, that we tend to have our eyes are bigger than our stomach in terms of we make plans, but what we can actually get done in a 2-year period is a lot less than what we thought it could be. And I know that this stormwater plan here feeds into what the next presentation will be in terms of stormwater rates. And I want to be very judicious in terms of our rates and making sure that we aren't raising the rates, collecting money, but we can't really deliver the projects anyway. And so my question really is, this is a really long list of projects, and some of them are really big. Do we really think we can do all of these projects in 2 years, even with new staff?
It's a great question. I have a few answers, and I can, I think if I share my screen while I am answering, it might help a little bit. Okay, so we did take a look at this. This was something that is very important to us, to making sure that we can deliver on our capital programs and projects. So knowing that, we actually placed a lot of these smaller projects within programs that would actually allow us to bundle how we deliver the projects. So that can create efficiencies both from staff and consultant side. So for example, if the first 4 to 5 projects listed within one of our programs, a great way to approach that would be to bundle all of those projects and have design done all at the same time. That saves in project management fees, it saves on resources, and then when something is funded programmatically, it can allow us to go to construction maybe every other year or every 3 years, but we have that consistent funding coming in so that we can essentially become a little bit more efficient at how we're approaching our programs and projects. 2 of our programs with the enhanced level of service, we've also built in kind of a ramp up year. So the first year or 2 are actually not funded, in its entirety. So that would allow us to implement those programs and see if there's any, lessons learned a few times when you are first initially looking at a new program, so that we can really adaptively manage to that program and then fully implement it in years 24 or 25. And then along with that, we did recommend, and it's included in the rate model in the next presentation, another FTE to begin in 2023 and another FTE to begin in 2025.
So was that a yes?
Yes. I'm very confident it's a yes. It's a long yes. The other thing that we really did is try to balance out the type of projects. There's different levels of complexity within each one of these programs. Some of them are relatively simple. Some of them are very involved, longer term projects. And so we tried to balance that out very well throughout the 6-year horizon so that we could deliver on these projects and programs.
Excellent, thank you. And then my follow-up question might be that the answer is in the next presentation. So you did a great job of laying that out with the cost there. Will we get into sort of other funding sources when we get into the rate study, so we can look at, I think it was, if I recall, it was 16 million-ish over the 2 years in terms of total cost, but I know that we have some grants that we've already received, some in the works, other things. Is that all going to be covered when you do your rate study presentation?
A little bit. I can dive into a little bit of it now. We would like to add some funding sources in our project and program guide. We did hint to that, but we can go ahead and make sure that those detailed amounts are included for the public to know as well. The main funding source for the utility is our surface water management fees. That's what's being studied through this rate study. Some supplemental revenue sources are our grants. So we've had wonderful opportunities through different grant programs at the county, state, and federal level to help with fund some of our projects and programs. We have many, many grants that we're constantly tracking and watching for those opportunities. And a lot of our programs and projects would be really great candidates for those funding opportunities. So something we're always keeping an eye on with the rate model presentation next up on the agenda. If the projects all stay on schedule and they're stay on budget as projected, we will require a little bit of borrowing in some of our outer years to help the utility fund some of the projects. And that would, most of the borrowing would need to occur in 2024.
Okay, because I do want to make sure, again, I don't want to be overly optimistic about funding sources, but I also don't want to be overly conservative, because then we will potentially borrow unnecessarily or raise the rates unnecessarily. So I do want us to have some kind of a projection of what we think is a reasonable amount of grant funding, because while, like you said, the main source may be the stormwater fees, we've gotten some pretty significant grants, and so it's not nothing. It's a very material dollar amount, which I think would definitely affect our rates. So I'm kind of anxious to see that before I'm comfortable. And I also, I guess from my perspective, on that stormwater capital improvement plan, you have those buckets. You've identified in the other plan what those projects would be, but not understanding completely what some of those funding sources might be. For me, it's hard to do the horse trading. Like when I do budgeting, I usually say, what's the priority, right? The pure, this would be the best thing to do in a perfect world kind of thing. And then we put the sort of the net costs next to each one. And then we do what we call the horse trading, right? That says, hey, we could do 3 of these for one of those, so maybe it would be better to do that. And so not having all that information laid out, it makes it really hard to decide if this is the right plan to get sort of the biggest ROI for those costs.
That makes sense, and it's a great comment. Part of our rationale as well with placing projects into programs is following Resolution 2018-804, which informs the stormwater utility on how to prioritize projects. And so part of that resolution did say, go ahead and place projects into these type of work buckets, if you will. And a lot of that is cost dependent. And then we score the projects, the projects are scored within that work bucket as well. And that's how they kind of advance first within that every single program. So within each one of those programs, we have identified a list of projects. It's stormwater always changes, so there's always things that come up, but that way it allows us to advance the next project that has the highest scoring within that program.
Councilmember Trine?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So on the stormwater facility retrofit project, and I believe it was on page 5, where it was stated that there may be circumstances in which retrofits may not be completed in order due to the end of fund balances in the stormwater funds. So what does that kind of mean? Maybe you just explained it to Councilmember Stewart, and can you help me out understand where would be the situation where it might not be completed in order?
Of course. A majority of our retrofit projects have a lower amount. I believe, if I recall off the top of my head, I think a lot of those projects were under 300,000. So something, our 6-year plan, we could, for the most part, advanced level of service, try to target between 4 retrofits, 4 to 5 retrofits within that horizon. There are a handful of retrofits that have a much higher dollar amount. So right now the planning level costs came back at closer to a few $1 million. And so in those instances, we may need to take a look at, do we advance all 4 of these smaller retrofits at once, or that one retrofit project, going back to, again, return on investment, where do we want to see those advance first, even though the retrofit project that has a higher volume has a lower score than maybe, the 3 above it. And those would be program project decisions that we could, of course, bring back to council if that's something that you're interested in learning more about.
So let's just say that the current council moves with policy that would tighten up our stormwater regulations, say for flow control, for an example, and then we go to retrofit projects. Is that another thing that may slow down the process or change the process that would then, make it a situation where it wouldn't be completed in order? Because we're gonna, I have a project, say at the top of Lewis Thompson's watershed, and so we're gonna fix that, retrofit that facility and change its flow control so that we actually can hold more water back, so we can control storm damage on the lower part of the watershed. Would that be one of those things where you say there are circumstances that may change the ability to complete it on time because we actually make it more environmentally sensitive, or we're going to attach it to a climate change action in the future, in say a year or 2?
That may affect project both scope, schedule, and cost, but it also may not, right? It kind of depends on, one, if there was policy guidance to change any of those policies. Right now, we have the 2021 design manual that we would adopt to. Those would be our standards. And we would be looking at retrofitting facilities in areas that don't have any flow control and water quality. So if something were to shift with that, and it may cause a shift in design as well as construction, but it also may not. It will probably come down to project by project and what each project entails. Some of those retrofits listed, they are just proposing to install smaller water filtration systems, essentially, in the right of way, and not as much flow control. So it's kind of the different things that they are proposing for their project, with the same goal of retrofitting areas for flow control and water quality. So long answer is it may depend, but it really would be project by project to see if that type of policy change would shift the schedule for those.
Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands. Was there anything else? They don't do comments on this, do they? Public comment? Okay. I think just online if we have anybody.
Okay. If you wish to provide comment, please raise your hand. For attendees joining by phone, please raise your hand by pressing *9. Okay, we have one commenter that I will promote.
Hi, this is Mary Wichter. I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. I moved here when the city turned into Sammamish, so since the beginning, and I've also been advocating for stormwater for the last 7 years since March of 2015 publicly. I do want to ask tonight that you add the stormwater CIP for Tamarack drainage improvements into the stormwater CIP list for 2023 to 2028. Today, I mailed in things, and you may have gotten things from other people that showed flooding that happens in the Northeast 4th Street corridor, and that happens on the north side. There's no place for it to go, and on the south side, there's fast flows that erode, and that carries silt and sediment around a 90-degree corner and floods across to 10th Avenue Northeast, which actually crosses a gravity subbasin boundary and ends up going to Lewis Thompson. The Northeast 4th Street really has nowhere to go. And there have been 40 homes that were permitted by the city while the city was a city, it wasn't King County. 20 of those are in the Northeast 4th Street gravity subbasin, and there are 10 of those that occurred in landslide hazard areas. The city had selected to use older stormwater code. There are higher thresholds for drainage review, so it meant they weren't being done because the higher threshold was being used. Also in 2000, the senior stormwater program manager had come to our area and noticed that there wasn't any problems. But as you know, there was a lot of house building going on up through about 2007. And that was when issues started, and the city was very clearly aware of them. On 209th, there is severe flooding that happens when it rains. And the road actually becomes a detention pond and it overflows to the houses below. We've had landslides on steep slope hazards, and we now recently, in the more recent years, have groundwater seepages, which I believe you also saw inputs on today. It's because infiltration is used in Tamarack because we have infiltrative soils, but you should not be using infiltration when you're in a landslide hazard drainage area. And that's actually required that you can't do that anymore. It's not technically feasible in code. And the city also found out that they didn't really identify the map properly for landslide hazard drainage areas. So that map was changed in 2017. Had that been done before, maybe the result would have been different, but that's where we have now. Anyway, what we're looking for is detention, and appropriate discharge locations are needed, and they should follow actual realistic code. So I'm going to ask that you add the Tamarack drainage projects in. It needs to have some amount of money with it. I would suggest 500,000 or more, because the thing that's actually in the plan actually tries to do infiltration with French drains. So it needs to be more than that. And then if we get on a list and we start looking for grant money, which I'm pretty sure we can get, you can get 400,000. So if they've got 500,000, unless you get 400,000, there's only a $100,000 cost. If you put it too low, we won't be able to get the grant money. We can't go forward without the grant money. And I love all the things that Karen Howe said. I think we should
Thank you so much.
send in that data before the next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you.
We have another commenter that I will promote.
Good evening, City Council. Paul Stickney here. I'm in support of adding, Tamarack to the SW 600 category. And I'd like to comment on a couple things I've heard over the years and what I think is common sense. Maybe it's not, but I think it is. Tamarack and the Inglewood plats were subdivided in what I'll call historic plats. So they didn't have all the rules and regulations of King County plats or Sammamish plats since 1970. So I think that stormwater in those areas should get addressed by the city in a different way. And there should definitely be participation between city funding and potentially private involvement of those owners based on the benefit ratio of fixing the stormwater. And there's a lot of folks downstream to factor into that equation. And as far as I know, those are the only two major plats that are large in scale that are not owned by having city streets, et cetera. But the other comment I'd like to make is I heard Councilmember Stewart and others talk about what's the right sort of mix of spending money for cost benefit, can't do all those things. And I'm not going to repeat everything I said last time about the George Davis Creek. I just want to summarize and say this. I'm all for fixing all the stormwater in George Davis. It's erosive. There's a lot of sediment that gets taken down the hill. That I'm 100% behind. But as a fish passage reach, I think it's a very minimal amount of added reach for the cost involved. I think the other major streams, Zaccoose, Ebright, Laughing Jacobs, Pine, fantastic. But I think all the money for the fish part of George Davis to only come partway up the hill, you're not going to even get anywhere close to the top because perennial flows start partway down the hill, and everywhere on top are either intermittent and mostly ephemeral flows that don't support fish habitat. So my advice is to look at the realistic conditions on the ground, recognize all the fantastic work in the other kokanee streams that have been done, and use this money in different parts of stormwater that would get more bang for the buck. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
I see no other commenters. Thank you.
All right, before I close this, is there anything else, Audrey?
That is it.
Okay, great. All right, so this public hearing is now closed. Do I need to say or do anything specific to close it? Gavel it? Done. All right, it's been a couple of hours. Is everyone good?
I have one more question for Audrey.
Oh yeah,
if possible.
we have one more question.
Sorry. I know we need to approve this in the next week or two, if I recall the schedule correctly. I think the one thing for me, like, I love that you're trying to kind of get into this regular rhythm with the different project categories, but they're really categorized mostly by how much they cost. And so for me, I really want to be able to make the decisions based on ROI. So when I look at all of those smaller categories added up, it's about $1.5 million a year for those categories. But there's not a good way for us to, I think, compare across those categories, right? And so I don't know if that's something, I think from a budget, we kind of need to come up with an overall dollar figure, I'm assuming, and maybe this is more for you, Scott. Are you just looking for us to kind of generally approve an overall dollar figure? But when we approve this CIP, the projects that are in the plan associated with this are the projects that are on that plan. They're going to be the projects that will be eligible for grants, and the ones that aren't there obviously won't be. So I just want to make sure we're all comfortable with that, and I don't know how to do that comparison, right? I don't know how to compare the projects in this category with the projects in that category from a return on investment perspective.
Councilmember Stewart, I appreciate the question. I think what might be helpful, since the CIP is based on the stormwater rate model that we are about to have that presentation on, I think those two pieces really go well together, and it might be helpful, and we can come back to your question after this presentation and see if that gets at it, or if there's still follow-up work for Audrey and the consultants to do on the back end before we come back with a final product.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, so we will move to the stormwater rate model. And I'll pass it back to you. Yeah.
Okay, while our consultants are being promoted, I can go ahead and introduce this next item. Again, Audrey Starcy, Interim Public Works Director. This next item will be discussing our stormwater rate study and our updates. The first set of slides will be presented by John Garaducci. He is with FCS Group and a principal with that consulting firm. They have been leading the city's efforts for this 2022 storm and surface water rate study throughout this year. So John will be presenting a handful of slides that will show updates to the rate model. The council last heard from us about the rate model at the beginning of September. And since then we have modified and updated our capital plan and a few other budget items. And we have a few updates across the board for the rate model. These updates will be shown for all proposed levels of service for the utility, so baseline, enhanced, and optimal. And then at the end of the presentation, I have a few slides where we're focusing on the enhanced level of service, something that was indicated by council as our preferred level of service earlier, actually last month, I apologize, in September. So John, whenever you are ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you,
Sure.
Mayor and Council. So we will focus on what's changed since the September visit that we had with you. I'm assuming you can hear and see the presentation, okay?
Yes.
So Audrey talked about the adjustments to the capital plan, the net effect of those, and this is the way that the capital costs were spread by the different levels of service. When we looked at these in September, you see the gold portion of each stack bar was the baseline level of service, that pale green enhanced level of service, and pink the optimal level of service. The net effect of the changes that Audrey showed you was that the capital costs went down, and in some cases significantly. All the reductions were in that baseline level of service, but that has an effect on each of the three service levels because they're additive. So you can see in 2023, about a $3.5 million decrease in capital planned for that year as a result of the changes you see in the bubble there, the Hazel Wolf Culvert improvement, Laurie Estates, the Lewis Thompson Road, the first portion of the Lewis Thompson Road Tightline project, and the 248th Avenue Southeast ditch avulsion. In 2024, the remaining Lewis Thompson Road Tightline project has about a $1.5 million decrease. The one exception is that Queens Bog Bioretention project. That is in the enhanced level of service, but it's just been moved out to 26, 27. There's no net reduction in cost for that one. So there were also some adjustments to operating line items. Audrey talked about the FTEs, but those were not material. It's really all about the capital changes that affect the rates and the proposed rates. So the biggest piece of good news is that the reductions in the capital costs mean that the baseline level of service rate forecast goes down pretty substantially, and we don't need to use debt at all to accomplish the baseline capital plan. We need less debt for both enhanced and optimal service levels as well, and those rates stay essentially the same. So this gives you an idea of where the money is expected to come from, and this is what we looked at in September for each of the different service levels. The numbers out here to the right are the amounts of debt that were forecast again in September for that previous iteration, and the total capital plans for each. This light blue section of each of these service levels are projected grants. So there are a number of grants built into the funding plan for the next couple of years. These are essentially secured by the city already. So we did take those into account, and we're really only trying to fund with rates and debt what's not already funded by SDC's grants and reserves. So again, that was the September forecast. Here's what it looks like for tonight. The total capital plans have all gone down, and you'll see no debt needed to accomplish the baseline service level. And reduced levels of debt for both enhanced and optimal. So what does that mean for the rates? This is the forecast you saw in September. You see the amounts of debt listed here in this second row, 3.5 million for the baseline level of service. Contrast that with tonight's forecast, and that baseline level of service, we were looking at 3% per year down to 1.5% per year. So that has a reduced effect on the monthly rates, and then no debt required. And then the amount of debt needed to accomplish enhanced and optimal capital plans goes down significantly. So, but the rate plans remain the same. What we've done is shift the amount of capital funded from cash as opposed to debt. So there's a much lighter debt load on the city under this revised scenario. And that is the sum total of changes from our September presentation.
Thank you, John. If we could take a quick pause, if there are any questions for this portion, and then I can share my slides for what the rate model looks like for the enhanced level of service and our operating capital budgets.
Councilmember Howe?
Is there such a thing as having different rates being charged to different residents based on certain requirements? Does it have to be the same amount to every resident?
So Audrey, I can address that if you like.
Okay, great.
We don't see rates differentiated by requirements typically, although I think Olympia had a structure in which, depending on the year of construction, they knew that the regulatory requirements were different, and so they charged different eras of development different rates because they were meeting different regulatory requirements. It became rather cumbersome and complex. What we see more often, and there are several examples of this, are single-family residential rates that are scaled with the size of the residence. So you might, or I should say, the size of the impervious footprint. So you might charge small, medium, and large footprints differently just to give it a little bit more resolution than charging single-family residences uniformly, which is by far the industry standard. There are obvious pros in the fairness that you're trying to align contribution of runoff a little better with how much folks are being charged in the residential class. But the downside is tracking. You need to know what the impervious surface area is for all those single family residences in order even to group them in small, medium, and large, let alone charge them for their actual measured impervious. So that's why it's not often done. In fact, it's very rarely done, but there are ways to try and bring some more resolution to that residential class. I hope I've answered your question.
You have actually, and the other question I have had, do we know what the calculation would be for residents that would claim that they wouldn't be able to afford this? So I'm assuming that there's a line item somewhere that says if they're under a certain threshold, they wouldn't be charged the full rates. Is that clear? I'm not sure if that's clear.
Yes, I can speak to that a little bit. That is actually done through the King County Assessor's Office. If I understand correctly, King County does our billing for us, and so any of those rate adjustments for low income or senior discounts are done through King County directly. I can confirm numbers for you, but I believe at one time it was half of the amounts, but I can confirm if that's the correct amount.
It's not a full exemption. I believe it is 50%, Audrey. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else before Audrey's? Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, John.
Okay, sorry, no, we have two more.
Sorry,
Deputy
Okay.
Mayor Lamb?
So wouldn't assessed property value be a more equitable way of determining the rates?
So they might be a better measure of ability to pay, but because these are rates, we can charge only based on their demand or use of services. And the way that's done, I mean, it's similar to a water or wastewater utility. You're charged more for the more water you use. And likewise with stormwater, the impact on the stormwater system and the requirement for stormwater management is directly related to the amount of impervious surface area on your developed property. And so we are limited to charging rates for that contribution of runoff or that sort of nexus or direct impact requiring service. And assessed value is appropriate for a tax, for example, but rates have a different, the bar is set differently in terms of the nexus between how much you're charged and your demand or impact on the service.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, can you go back to the chart with the bar chart with the different sources? Is it possible for us to get something that has actual numbers for each of those colored bars?
Yes.
Okay, that'd be great. And then on that last slide where you talk about the total capital funded for 2022 to 2028, the 33.6, the 44, and the 56, I'm assuming that that's if we add up the total costs on the spreadsheet, Audrey, that you gave us for the stormwater capital improvement plan? Is that what those numbers are?
That's correct. I do want to, there are a few differences, so, and I can dive into that with my presentation, but the capital plan was in $2022, so that's probably the biggest difference where FCS has applied all of their different assumptions and escalators to get to a truer amount in terms of making sure that we're projecting the right revenue needs for the utility.
Okay, and that's good, because I was going to ask about that. One of the other things, though, is that for the bigger projects that are listed on the Stormwater Capital Improvement Plan, are those the total costs or just the design costs that are listed on here?
On this particular chart shows all of the costs listed in the capital plan. And then the breakdown in the capital plan has the schedules. A great question. Majority of the bigger program costs include on that plan include different phases. So design, if there's easement or right-of-way, acquisition and permitting costs, as well as construction.
Okay.
So our larger projects that are listed on there, I believe, are all inclusive. There's a handful of projects once you get out to the later years, 27, 28, where it might just be the first phase of the project.
Okay, I was going to say, because I know just looking through the plan addendum that came along with it, some of the projects were really big, and I don't see any of those on here. So I just wanted to make sure we were counting that all in there. So, and I'm sorry, because I got to make all the numbers sync in my head, but it's
okay.
where it says annual rate funded by capital for like the 2.7 million versus the total. I feel like if I do 2.7 times 6, I don't get 33.6. So what does that row, the next to last row, mean versus the last row?
The last row includes all those other sources of funding. So that's just the amount that's coming from rates. So if
Got
you
it.
go back
Okay.
to this table, it's only that gold portion that is the rate funded
Okay.
capital.
Great. Thank you.
Now I see why you wanted
Fantastic.
the numbers.
What's that?
Now I see why you wanted the numbers on the bar chart.
Yeah, I just got to make it all make sense in my head.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, go ahead, Audrey.
Thank you.
I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for your patience. Wanted to make sure I had the right presentation up. We have a few this evening. Um, thank you, John, for the update for the rates. And I wanted to just go back again. I know this is a lot going on at once. I wanted to make sure that really this evening, as we were hoping to receive any feedback on both budget and the enhanced level of service, and receive that final concurrence that we do indeed want to proceed with enhanced level of service. And then, as John just was discussing, the rates that would be affiliated with that enhanced level of service, which would be 6.25 increase for the year. Just wanted to, I'm hoping this will help with some of the numbers, you know, as in the next little bit, as you're looking at both budgets and the rate model, there are some differences. That's because at some point we had to kind of make a cutoff. And so with the rate model, we started with the 2022 budget. We removed 2022 one-time expenditures. We added expenditure increases for level of service. So different things like the stormwater's allocation to IT, to fleet, et cetera. And took those most recent numbers and added those to our projections. And then we also added our increased levels of service items. I'll go through those in the next slide. For both our operating budget, that's the 408 fund, as well as our capital budget, that's the 438 fund. And all of those amounts were added in 2022 dollars. And then FCS worked with us to apply the right assumptions and escalators, and that's what you'll find in the rate models for the revenue needed. So this is the both the operational and the capital funds, as I was just describing. Both are projected expenses for 23 and 24. This, and as well as the ending fund balance for both of those. This assumes that we are proceeding with the enhanced level of service with a 6.25% increase in our stormwater rates. We already have gone over some of the capital projects in detail with the hearing, but just wanted to make sure they were listed on this slide as well. This should look a little bit familiar, but I just wanted to make sure and go over it tonight. We've discussed the FTEs and the enhanced level of service. There are a few additions to our operational programs for the enhanced level of service. And primarily that is including our fish barrier assessment. I believe that's in 2024. And we'll be implementing our pipe condition assessment where we'll go in and camera our stormwater pipes. That program is set to be implemented in 2023 as an ongoing program. And then our capital projects and programs, you'll have definitely seen those in detail. I just wanted to make sure the lower amounts in this really distinguish the levels of service. The top portions in this slide really describe the baseline projects and programs, and everything else, the bottom three checks there really describe the additions in the enhanced level of service and what we'll get for that rate increase. That was all I had. It was very quick presentation. And if there are any questions, I will stop sharing my screen here. Back to you, Mayor.
All right, Councilmember Trine.
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but thank you, Audrey and staff and consultant for the presentation. And I just want to say that I concur with the presentation that we move for an enhanced level of service, and that understanding that this level of service proposes to increase the rates for stormwater utility in the years of 2023 through 2028, which would also provide the citizens of Sammamish with a enhanced level of service when it comes to stormwater. Thank you very much and appreciate all the hard work.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I feel like I need a lot more detail before I can kind of pull the trigger on. So if I understand the numbers correctly, I tried to jot them down as you guys were kind of scrolling through the presentation, but for the enhanced level of service, we would be increasing the stormwater rates from, I think they're $396 a year now, to $420 in 23, $444 in 24, and $480 in 25, I think. And again, like all those numbers went by really fast and they were on a monthly basis versus an annual basis. But what we got in our presentation earlier was annual, so I was trying to do all the conversions. So I'm not really comfortable kind of saying I'm good with A, B, or C because like there's a lot of numbers to compare. And then really understanding how are we looking to manage, if I jotted it down correctly, the operating costs will be 21.8 million roughly, and capital is about 17.3. So are we looking at making sure that the stormwater fees are covering all of operating and then some of capital? Like how does that break down on an ongoing basis? Or does it not? I don't know if you followed all of that, sorry. And I know we're throwing a lot at you, and I know you've done a lot of the legwork, so I don't want you to feel like, but I just, there are a lot of numbers to kind of wrap my head around, as they fly by on a presentation, and I need to kind of like touch them or something. Thanks.
I can speak to a little bit for the rate study and the 23-24 expenses. Those numbers would be, we projected revenue for both of those years. With the enhanced level of service, we would be looking at cash funding a majority of our expenses for those years. It would cover operating expenses, and where we may need to look at additional borrowing would be for some of our capital programs. So, and that's if everything stays on schedule as listed in the capital plan. And I don't have that number up in front of me because I have too many presentations in front of me, but John, if you happen to remember the borrowing amount for 2024 off the top of your head.
Yeah, I can get, let's see, do I have it by year? That's the question.
And then while he's kind of pulling that up, Audrey, if we borrow money, if we go with enhanced, we have to borrow money. And so the higher stormwater rates would be to pay that back, correct? But yes. I'm assuming that the borrowing timeline would be a much longer timeline than just 2 to 6 years, correct?
20 years.
20 years, okay.
I was able to pull that up, John. I believe we were looking at funding with the enhanced level of service up to $3 million in 2024.
Yeah, and 26.
And up to $1 million in 2026.
Yep. Just found it. Thank you.
So we take out a bond for this, and that would cover the entire 6-year plan, though.
Well, that combined with the other resources, some of it's cash from rates, fund balance. Grants are part of it, and system development charges. So we want to use all those resources first before cash funding from rates and debt. So we've tried to reduce the amount of debt funding by using those other sources.
Understood, but you're still proposing for the enhanced level of service to borrow money, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a 20-year term, but it would only cover the cost for a 6-year plan. Is that correct?
That's right, for those projects in the next 6 years, yes.
All right, thanks.
Councilmember Howell?
As I look at trying to figure out the Tamarack situation, I look at, well, gee, if we borrow money for a 20-year term, could we just go ahead and do a 20-year term and just borrow some more money to fix that problem? And it would be an add. I mean, it makes it expensive for staff, and I understand that because it's an extra project. But as I look at trying to figure out a solution to this, rather than ignoring it, is there a different way of constructing something so that we just take a longer loan and on behalf of a set of residents that have private property that have a stormwater problem? So it's a question. I mean, I know we're not a bank, but what if we could be? What if we could operate like one? Find a way to do a public-private sort of agreement that would enable this situation to get resolved.
Excuse me, Mayor. I just want to weigh in on that last comment by Councilmember Howe, if I may. So I would need to research whether or not, for example, a LID, local improvement district, could be formed to help fund such a project. But the city is not permitted under the Washington State Constitution to act like a bank and lend credit. But it is possible, and again, it would require some research to see if a local improvement district could be formed for this purpose. Thank you.
And that's why we have a lawyer. All right. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Now that I see that baseline's no debt, I'm like, oh, I kind of like that one now. But I originally said I liked the enhanced, which I still prefer the enhanced. And I don't know if you are actually looking for a vote this evening. It doesn't seem like we're completely ready for it.
Mayor, we are actually just looking for concurrence to keep going and bring the final rate model and capital plan back on the 18th.
Cool. Okay. So I'll let anyone else weigh in if they would like to. Okay. Was that helpful?
Thank you very much.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Would everyone like a $5? Yes. Okay. Let's do until, 5-minute break. If that works. Cool. Or a 7-minute break, what did you say? 9:15, sorry, 9:15, I've been told. Yeah. All right, we are coming back. Okay. Next up, we are going to move to item 13, the 23-24 capital budgets overview, and I will pass it off to City Manager, I think.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Scott McCall, Interim City Manager. Tonight is the third sort of pre-budget submittal presentation that we have brought to Council, and appreciate again Council's time and willingness to go through this with us. So Mike, if you would. So tonight we're going to go over the proposed capital fund budgets. So you're going to see fewer of the leadership team tonight because there's only a couple departments that actually have capital fund budgets. So you won't get the full gamut. And then we're going to discuss a couple adjustments that were made based on the discussion we had last week regarding some funding allotments. So Mike, if you would. So I just want to continue to reiterate that as we move towards this, we are aiming for long-term financial sustainability, recognizing that we have some work to do to get there. That what you're seeing here is what's reflected in the work plan, that we are trying to prioritize goals set from the goal-setting retreat and direction from the June 28th financial sustainability discussion about maintaining our services and staffing. So, and once again, as you heard from the fire chief earlier this evening, the current economic climate is challenging. And so that is also obviously going to be reflected in pretty much all of our projects that you'll see on the capital side. They are probably higher than we would like them to be simply because stuff costs more. So with that, Mike, if you would. So just a reminder, here has been our overall council budget calendar, and thank you to Aaron and the team for maintaining this piece and getting us this far. So we are at October 4th. We are going through both the direction on utility rates, which we already did. We went through the EFR presentation, and tonight we're going through the rest of the capital fund budgets. Coming up on on October 14th, we will be submitting the official budget. And then on November 1st, we'll have our first hearing and discussion on the actual final rolled up proposed budget. And with the goal of hopefully passing the budget on November 15th, along with our property tax ordinances that go with the budget. So with that, Mike, if you would. All right. So with this, I will turn it over to Aaron to take us away on the actual financial side.
So we're talking capital funds tonight. So the three capital funds that we're going to look at are the 301, which is our general facilities capital fund, our 302 fund, which is our parks capital fund, and our 340 fund, which is the transportation capital. So after we go through the capital funds that we would have covered in our three workshops that we've had, all of our funds that we have in the city. So we're we're walking through that last piece tonight, which is the capital fund. So each of these will be, we'll go through tonight. So we'll start off with the General Facilities Capital Fund. A reminder here, the total expenditures, so this is just an overall summary of these three funds that you're seeing in this table here. So the overall expenditures that were budgeted for the 23-24 period is that 56 million there, and then it's broken down into the three distinct funds on those line items in the table above. Also budgeted is 25 million that's in these three funds in those different three amounts. So those numbers will reappear in a table that's going to be in the budget ordinance later when you see that in November, but this is the summary just on the capital. Another reminder of the note, we talked about the transfer from the general fund when we were covering our general fund earlier in that budget workshop in September. And we talked about that almost 11 million, 10.8 million that was transferring from the general fund into the capital fund. So the capital fund it was transferring into is that first fund, the 301 fund, the General Capital Facilities Fund. And the note identifies the amount of the transfer in each year, but the total is still that 10.8 million number. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Anjali for covering our first fund.
Thank you, Aaron. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah. Good evening, City Council. I'm Anjali Maya, Director of Parks, Recreation and Facilities. And the work in our department falls under two capital improvement plans, which we refer to as CIPs for short. It's been a while since these CIPs have brought in front of City Council, so I will provide a short overview of what these plans encompass for context before turning it over to Kevin Teague, our Deputy Director, to go over specifics of the upcoming 23-24 budget. The first is the Facility CIP, which falls under the General Government Capital Fund. The city owns a total of 12 major facilities, including City Hall, the MOC, Beaver Lake Shop, 3 fire stations, what used to be called the Mars Hill Church leased to Central Washington, the Recreation Center leased to the Boys and Girls Club, the Sammamish Community and Aquatic Center leased to the YMCA, the Sween House leased to Crosspath Counseling, and a few smaller facilities in our parks, such as the Beaver Lake Lodge and the restrooms at Pine Lake Park. While the day-to-day maintenance of these leased facilities are the responsibility of the tenants, major renovations or improvements of most of these facilities, with the exception of the community center, is the responsibility of the city. A draft of the city's 6-year capital improvement plan for facilities was last presented to City Council on August 11th of 2020. The second is the Parks CIP. Sammamish's park system has grown over the years to a total of 15 diverse and quality parks, preserves, natural areas, and special facilities totaling 675 acres. This parkland has accumulated through transfers, purchases, and generous donations. Our current adopted Park CIP is included in the 2018 Parks Recreation and Open Space Plan, which is the guiding document for all our work. And a draft update to this 6-year Park CIP was also last presented to City Council on August 11th of 2020. With that brief overview, I will turn it over to Kevin.
All right. Thank you, Anjali. And thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council, and City Manager. The General Government Capital Fund is funded from the city's general fund, and it covers primarily facilities capital projects. As you can see, and as Aaron mentioned, we are requesting approximately $11 million from the general fund for the 2023-24 biennium. The major projects to be done with these funds are, first of all, Fire Station number 82. This is a much needed renovation of the fire station located on 228th Avenue Northeast. And we have worked through the design of the structure and we'll be ready to start construction in the spring of next year. The cost of this renovation is roughly $8 million. We are planning a renovation for City Hall, that will help us to accommodate city staff, the Sammamish Police, and the King County Sheriff's Office in an efficient manner as the city grows. We recently released a request for qualifications to select a consultant to assist us with this renovation. Additionally, we will be looking for property for a storage yard to replace what we call the Sween Yard. This is on the Notch property, which is in the town center development area. Along with money for acquisition, we are requesting funds to make necessary improvements to purchased property to make it functional for city use. Overall, we are looking at about $16 million in expenditures between 2023 and 2024, leaving a fund balance of around $8,000. Next slide, please. Included in the requested fund transfer to the General Government Capital Fund are several important additions to the base budget. We are requesting funds to increase the fuel station capacity at the Maintenance and Operations Center, or MOC. This will increase staff efficiency, reduce vehicle trips, and increase our emergency preparedness by having a greater supply of fuel on hand during emergency situations. We have also included a couple of electric vehicle charging stations at the MOC for staff. We see this as a growing need and know that we will need to do more, but felt it would be important to get a start on adding them to our facilities. Staff have identified the need for some fall protection measures on the roofs of a couple of our facilities, one being City Hall. This is for the safety of our building maintenance staff, and we have included the request for these funds to remedy this situation due to the importance of the issue. Lastly, we've included money to assist with the installation of the DEIB art sculpture planned for Big Rock Park North. This will pay for miscellaneous expenses such as a concrete base, irrigation modifications, and any site work that needs to be done to add the sculpture to the park. The total addition to the base budget for the general government CIP is $485,000. Next slide, please. I'll now move on to the Parks Capital Fund. And the first thing to mention is that this fund does not draw from the general fund, but it is funded through other sources, primarily a portion of the real estate excise tax, or REIT. In our recent climate, this has yielded about $3.5 million annually. Additional funding comes from park impact fees, as well as portions of the King County voter-approved levy funds, as well as grants. We estimate the Parks Capital Fund will have a beginning fund balance in early 2023 of over $30 million. Our Parks planning team will be busy working on a number of significant projects over the next 2 years. A major focus will be on athletic field development, starting with the field development at Englewood Middle School. Here we will be adding 2 multi-purpose synthetic turf fields with lights to accommodate a variety of sports and to increase playable hours for the Sammamish community. We will also be replacing the synthetic turf at East Lake Community Sports Field number 3 and working on renovations to the baseball fields at East Sammamish Park. In addition to those athletic field projects, we will be completing the master plan for Beaton Hill Park and Big Rock Park South, as well as replacing the tile in the natatorium at the Sammamish Community and Aquatic Center, or YMCA. These are just the highlights of our capital improvement plan. The balance of our projects are a variety of smaller or ongoing initiatives. So with that, I would like to say thank you, and I will turn it over to Audrey Starcy, our Interim Public Works Director, to talk about the Transportation Capital Fund. Audrey?
Thank you, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, Audrey Starcy, Interim Public Works Director. Just a few things to go through on this slide of note. I just wanted to start with the ending fund balance as shown on this slide is actually a majority of that balance is a restricted fund, so restricted for concurrency eligible projects. And I also wanted to note that the transportation impact fees, commonly referred to as traffic impact fees or street impact fees, and we are planning an update to those fees and the restart of that update project. And we'll be diving into those fees in a little bit more detail on October 11th. Major capital project expenditures planned for 2023 and 2024 for transportation capital are the Lewis Thompson Road Tightline project. You'll see the funding amounts for this project are coming out of the transportation side. We discussed this project as well earlier in the evening with the stormwater side. So this project is funded through 2 capital funds. The amount before you is transportation only. Another project that we have planned for the 23-24 capital, year, or the Sahali Way Signal Improvement Project. This is a TIF eligible project, and that is currently undergoing a feasibility alternatives analysis right now. The third project on this list is also a TIF eligible project. It's a Sahali Way improvement from the city limits down to 28th Place. The fourth item on this list is TR 106. It is a component I'll go into a little bit more detail on the next slide. It is our capital reconstruction project for streets that need to be completely rebuilt due to poor pavement conditions. And the ADA barrier program removal is an ongoing program that we have funded from similar amounts in prior budgets. And finally, the East Shore Lane project I'll discuss in the next slide as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, wanted to go over pavement management. So pavement management in Sammamish is funded through 2 components. One is our operating budget, and the second component is our capital budget. I know the focus this evening is on capital presentations, but the pavement preservation and overlay program is a significant part of the Public Works operating budget, so we wanted to discuss it with council this evening. Before you, the royal blue boxes, the names in those represent the program that you'll usually see in the budget book. So the roadway overlay and pavement preservation program will be something that you'll see as the budgets come out. Within that program, we've currently added to the base budget our 228th roadway overlay project that is grant funded and was originally planned for 2022 and will be completed in 2023. The second line item for $529,000 is our contingency for that project in case there are overages. So the first line is actually completely reimbursed by federal funding. The second line would be the city's match in case the bids come back a little bit higher than what our projections are. The third line item within that program are funding amounts that we would like to go over with council a little bit this evening. So streets that would fall into this category would receive several different treatment techniques. It includes some slurry seals, crack sealing, overlays, a variety of different work to preserve and maintain our pavement conditions. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. This line does include our 2 Klahania overlay that was originally planned for 2022 and will be now completed in 2023. So that is the operating component of pavement management. The capital component was mentioned a little bit in the last slide, but just wanted to provide that holistic look into pavement management at the city. So TR 106 is our street reconstruction program that is new to this year's transportation capital plan that was adopted in July 5th of this year. Within that program, we identify streets that are in need of complete repair. So this is reconstruction in kind. We're not overlaying the streets or simply applying a preservation technique. They actually need to be completely replaced. So that is the purpose of that program, and we are proposing to dedicate $1 million a year to that program. We could consider moving the Shore Lane reconstruction project in that program. It's a fantastic project for that program and is an eligible candidate to be put into that program. If we do that with this year's budget consideration, that would mean that other streets within that project list within that program would be delayed a little bit in their treatments, so it might be pushed into 2024 work. Next slide, please. This is just a different way of looking at some of the numbers for pavement management. Again, the kind of light teal boxes are our operating budget, and the I guess lavender boxes are our capital budget, the TR 106 program that I was just discussing. The operating budget Again, I just went over a few different treatment methods. So our current pavement management program consists of a little bit more traditional techniques. So primarily overlays, so new hot mix asphalt, as well as crack sealing and pavement patching. We would like to start to work towards a little bit more preventative program. It is more cost efficient, but it includes different methods such as slurry sealing, and surface sealing. There's micro sealing. There's so a lot of new techniques that we'd like to start working with in Sammamish. The opportunity for us to look at preventative measures is that it is much more cost effective. It preserves our roads, our network for much longer. So the column on the left is the citywide PCI, or Pavement Condition Index. That's a score that is given to each one of our roads within our network. Sammamish is very fortunate to maintain a citywide PCI of 86, relatively unheard of. It's a really great score, and right now the budget that we're asking for is $3.5 million a year to continue to maintain a PCI between 80 and 86. Next slide, please. And this final slide just provides a draft for your resurfacing plan. This is essentially what can be done if this program is funded for $3.5 million a year. And of course, $2.5 million would be go into the operating fund, and $1 million per year would go into the capital fund with that TR 106 program. The graphic on the right provides a tentative plan. We would come back to council later on this year or early 2023 with our final plan once we have our budget funding confirmed for this program. And that wraps up my presentation for transportation capital and pavement management. So back to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, and good evening, Council. Mike Suggs, Senior Management Analyst for the City Manager's Office. We just have two more slides here. This slide, we're looking at a City Manager proposed addition to the budget. During the budget presentation last week, we heard that there was a desire from Council to get some additional funding to help implement the city's climate and sustainability work. So we went back and looked at the proposed additions to the base budget and identified that the DEIB program could move forward with less funding, and that the money saved from that could go towards additional climate and sustainability work. So the staff proposal here is to adjust the funding for the DEIB program down from $300,000 per year to $150,000 per year, which will still allow for significant progress on this work. And the remaining $150,000 per year would be shifted into a bucket of funds for the climate and sustainability program. As noted at the bottom of this slide here, there are many items related to climate and sustainability that are already proposed in the budget, such as the Urban Forest Management Plan implementation, the new Climate and Sustainability Coordinator full-time equivalent position, Climate Action Plan, things of that nature. And this $150,000 per year would be in addition to the funding for these other items that I just mentioned. So with that said, I will turn it over to Aaron to close us out for the PowerPoint, and then we should have some time for questions.
So just reviewing next steps real quickly, kind of coming back for our overall timeline. So tonight is the last of our 3 preliminary budget workshops. So we've gone through the operating funds, we've gone through the internal service funds, we hit on the stormwater utility fund. We also went through the capital funds then tonight. So we've covered all of our funds. And so at the conclusion of this, it would be time for any final council direction to the city manager prior to the date coming up where the city manager needs to file the preliminary budget for 23-24. So that filing date is October 14th. And upon that filing, once that occurs, that's filed with the city clerks, and the city clerk's office then publishes notice to the public that the preliminary budget has been filed. That has to be republished 2 consecutive weeks prior to the first public hearing, and the first public hearing date on the 23-24 budget is proposed to be November 1st. So that's the date that we're scheduled to set up that first public hearing. Also on that date, there's an additional public hearing for the 2023 property tax levy. So that's 2 hearings on the November 1st, and then following that, November 15th, there's a second public hearing, both on the budget ordinance and the property tax ordinance. And then on the 15th, there's some companion resolutions as well that you'll see on there. That's where the salary resolution and the master fee schedule resolution come up. So those things are incorporated in the budget ordinance numbers themselves. So that's what we look like timing-wise. Turn it back to you.
That's all from the perspective of the presentation, Mayor. So we're happy to take questions at this point in time.
All right, council, any questions? Deputy Mayor Lamb?
I had a couple of questions. Thank you, Mike, for responding to our questions via email on the budget. That was super helpful. I had a question on the climate. So it's great to see that more money was moved to climate. In your response to my question, you mentioned that there was a consultant working on a scope of work, and this consultant group has experience developing plans for other cities. But last week, David Pyle said that there was no consultant, and it was challenging right now to find somebody to work on climate. So I wasn't clear on, do we have a consultant or do we not?
Interim City Manager McCall, would you like me to take this one?
Go for it.
Yeah, so my understanding, this project is living in the Administrative Services Department, is that we do not have a consultant at the moment, but we will be putting this out through an RFP process. I do understand that the Community Development Department has had some issues attracting consultants, I think particularly in the area of for planning work. I think that's been a especially heavy area right now. A lot of cities are doing planning work. I don't know off the top of my head the environment for consultants doing DEIB type of work and whether or not they're under the same constraints as our planning consultants. So I think it's going to be a little bit uncertain until we put out that RFP and we are able to see who responds to that.
Okay, so I guess I wasn't clear on your email response where you said there was a consultant that was already doing scope of work. I guess it's two totally different things.
Scott, is that Arch Bright?
Yeah, so I think if we're talking about DEIB, yeah.
No, we're talking about climate.
The climate. Yeah, so for the climate piece, I think if I recall what David Pyle was saying at the last presentation is that I think he was responding to Councilmember Stewart's request to be able to speed it up. And he was suggesting that the climate in the consultant market is tough enough right now that that's not really possible to do. And because there are so many, there's so much demand for this type of work right at the moment, if I recall correctly. But we can circle back with that one, Councilmember Lamb. I don't recall off the top of my head where we are. We have we received the grant to move forward with the climate action plan, and I can't recall off the top of my head where we are in that process.
Oh, okay. I was just trying to reconcile two different responses, that's all.
We can go back and take a look at those and clarify those for sure.
It's good to see a timeline, and we've had a number of residents come in and under the impression that we haven't done any work, and they think that we're not doing anything. So it's good to see that we're targeting late summer of 2024 to have a plan, and that due to the size of this project, it's going to be 18 months due to the public process, and in the event that we want to speed it up, that we can have a shortened public process. My other comment is for senior programming, and we've had a number of residents come in talking about that as well and wanting more funds for that. And I guess I'm putting the question out to you, City Manager. What can we do to increase the amount that we provide for senior programming from what it is right now?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think if council chose to go this road, we could boost the amount of dollars that are in the current amount that is designated for seniors. I think council had the discussion that they wanted, the direction that I heard was to turn those dollars over to the Human Services Commission and have the Human Services Commission implement those dollars. So we could take some money out of fund balance in essence and add to that amount. And we could go wherever council would like us to go with that. We picked a number that we felt was reasonable given that the last version that what was applied for was $15,000 a year. So we boosted that up to $25,000 a year for senior programming. I think one of the challenges we face is that we're not entirely sure what that would get us once we go out to RFP. We don't, it will depend on what we are asking for in terms of what services are being provided. Since we are not currently a service provider, that's not something that we have a lot of experience in, and I think that was the approach for going out to the RFP, is to try to get some sense of that. If council wants to boost that amount, we're happy to accommodate if that's the will of the group.
I'm looking down the line.
Councilmember Howe?
To that point, I would like to know the schedule from the Human Services team to know when we could see what they're recommending. Because I think there's great impatience, and which I completely understand. So it would be extraordinarily helpful to have some kind of schedule or timeline. It's very likely that this amount will have to be increased. I think it does become, I don't want to hire staff. I don't want to hire an FTE for this. I want the organizations to do that, to manage their own programming. That's my belief. Because unlike some of the other cities that have senior centers, we don't have visitor bureaus. We don't have revenue that comes in from those visitor bureaus or from tourists. So we have a different structure here in terms of our property taxes funding everything. So my concern is being able to create something that's sustainable going forward. That's my concern. But if we could get a timeline on when we could have some suggestions about how we could move ahead quickly to get some kind to contract for programming, I think that could be a way forward. That means we don't have to have staff, that we contract for the programming, not unlike we contract for other services. And then we're able to kick off with something at Beaver Lake Lodge really soon, like, before the end of the year for sure. That would be, in my mind, that would be perfect, or close to perfect.
Thank you, Councilmember. We will circle back and check in with staff in the Human Services Commission about what is possible, given the other part of their process that they have going on right now, which you will be hearing from them. Mike, help me out. Help me recall when they're coming to council.
They'll be coming to council with the recommendation for human services funding next week on the 11th.
So we will get that information by the time they come next week, and then hopefully you will have some sense of where that goes.
Councilmember Napuri?
Yep. Sorry, I just want to echo what Deputy Mayor Lamb said. I think I would like to see more funding allocated towards senior programming as well. And I know the city will not be able to provide the direct funding. And then, we will go and do an RFP. And there are many providers around here who have that kind of experience. But I would like to see that increased from $25,000 to something more, where we can provide our senior citizens some substantial programming, at least in the short term, and then we can see how the program works and then choose to sort of, fund it more or depending on what the response is as well. Sammamish has a growing population of folks who kind of fall into the senior category, and I think we need to really be looking at that. having older parents as well. I know it can get very lonely for senior citizens, and I think as a community, it's our duty to make sure that they are provided for. And I think we had a public comment earlier today. I think Sammamish is a place where people come in, to raise their families, and then they choose to get older here. So I definitely support serving that part of our community. Thanks.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, thank you. I have a kind of a whole list because like that presentation had like 3 or 4 or 5 plans in there. So hopefully I can cover off on all of them. I know we already have a plan for Fire Station 82 remodel. One of the things that's not in that plan is solar panels. And I think that that's something we ought to reconsider with the cost of energy, and that cost of energy is probably not going to be going down. The sooner we put solar panels on and start recouping that money, the more we save. So it's just something to think about. Generally, most of my comments are going to be about spending less, not spending more, but I think that's one of those that it has a payback, right? It's not a sunk cost. You often recoup your money and then actually start saving at some point in time. So I'd like to see something like that. That's where I think getting people started on the climate work and looking across various climate action plans in our neighboring cities, there are probably things that we don't have to do a lot of study to know that those are steps we should be taking, because it's sort of included in everyone's plans. I feel like we need at least one project in our budget that's going to be about generating revenue. So far, we've only talked about spending money, and then we talked about spending some more money. And then we talked about borrowing money and spending money. So I really feel like we need to have something in our budget that will end up in our plan next year. I think we have a little, like $14,000, I think I saw in the response for, the fiscal sustainability plan, but that's just going to be the plan to tell us we have to go do things. There's not actually anything I didn't see in the budget on how we could go start some of those revenue generating programs. And Scott, which one I want, right? I want the traffic camera program. It's got a public safety component as well as a revenue generating component. So something along those lines. I love seeing that you guys are talking about EV charging stations. I'd love to know how many we're thinking about putting in. Are we making sure that we're including enough wiring as we're doing all of these remodeling projects to be able to install even more chargers down the road, right? Because I don't remember which date it is, if it's 2030 or 2035, something like that, where we're not going to be able to get gas-powered vehicles in the state of Washington anymore. And to that end, one of the things I did want to bring up was, I don't know if it was a year ago or a year and a half ago, but there was a request to replace some of our vehicles, the staff vehicles, right? The vehicles that people use to go out and do I think the inspections and stuff. We have some electric vehicles today. The request was to replace those with non-EVs, and I would like us to revisit that. I don't think we should be replacing vehicles like that with non-EVs at this point in time. There are certain vehicles that don't have an electric option, right? Some of our heavier equipment, larger trucks, but the vehicles we use around town are relatively inexpensive. And even if the batteries need to be replaced, that's still way less expensive than buying a brand new car. And I think the total cost of ownership on EVs when they have high mileage is lower than a gas-powered vehicle. And I would imagine that was before gas was over $5 a gallon, right? One of the questions I had was, we showed 14 million left in the Transportation Capital Fund, but I thought I saw in some other plan that we were actually transferring from funds from the general fund for the Transportation Capital Fund. So I'm a little confused why there'd be a 14 million ending balance and why we would take money from the general fund to pay for transportation projects.
So the 14 million, this is Aaron Anton, Finance Director. So the 14 million that was shown just in the Transportation 340 fund as an ending fund balance for 2024, recall that a large portion of that, I don't know if the slide's up, but a large portion of that is restricted for impact fee eligible projects. So there's less of that fund balance available to use on other projects. So as there's, and this is only reflective through the 2024 period. So as you slide outside of 2024 into 25 and beyond, and you plan for outgoing transportation projects, those larger needs will create a demand on revenue sourcing for those. So that could come in the form of additional grants or all of those other types when we're looking at particularly the Transportation Capital Improvement Plan, because it's a 6-year horizon that you're looking at for that. This is just looking at the 2-year front end of that.
Okay, thanks. There was also a comment made on the 228th overlay project that there was a rather large contingency in case the rates came in higher than expected, but I thought we voted a while back to go ahead and lock in on a contract, but not start it till the spring. So I'm a little confused why we need $529,000 of contingency for that overlay project when I thought we locked in on the rates.
Thank you, Councilmember Stewart. We did, and I can double check with our project engineer. He's not on the line tonight to make sure, but I believe that included a variety of things, and I think only 200,000 of that was contingency, and that may have also some of that contingency money might have been construction and engineering support throughout the construction phase of the project. But I can double check and get back to you.
Okay, it just seems like a big, it's like more than a third of the cost, so that seems like an awfully big contingency. Councilmember Lamb, you were talking about a plan and a timeline for, was that for the vehicle miles traveled reduction aspect of the comp plan? Is that what that was?
No, I was just talking about the plan for climate, the timeline for having a climate action plan in place.
Did I miss that mail? Because I didn't see a plan for that.
It was in the email. We just sent in questions about the budget, and that came in from Mike Sugg that the timeline was September, end of September, or rather 2024, end of summer. And then it would be an 18-month plan.
Okay. I will go look for that. Excellent. And then, and that starts when? That starts now? That starts in January? Okay. I'd still like to see us move that up even more. I know that, you know, resources might be in demand, but let's put out the RFP. I mean, worst thing that can happen is nobody responds, but maybe we actually get someone. So I just don't think we can continue to wait. And then on seniors, so I was thinking about it. One of the things with our human services grant funding, right, is that we, one, we don't usually pay out until someone, it's more of like a reimbursement model. And so are we thinking about senior programming? Like, should we be thinking about it a little bit differently, right? Like, we do some programming throughout the city for kids, and we have, we help find space, for example, for like the Boys and Girls Club so that they can provide services for the youth. I realize that those are paid services that parents purchase, but because we do have such a large population of seniors, is there a way for us to think about that model a little bit differently? Expecting a new organization to try to spin up and deal with that and show the numbers of participation before they can get reimbursed, that may not be a reasonable way to get started. And so I do think it's good to go through the Human Services Commission, but I think we might want to ask the Human Services Commission to think a little bit outside of the box that they're in for many of the services that they provide grants for, because most of those grants are to established organizations that are serving needs that, you know, things are already established and in place. And so I just think we might need to think about this a little bit differently and how we get this started and spun up. So it was just some thoughts I had there, and I would agree. I think we want to make sure we provide an appropriate amount of funding given the size of that population. and that we at least make it on par with some of the money that we spend on our kids, because I don't think the seniors are less important than our kids, for sure. And then finally, for the resurfacing and overlay projects, I know we want to keep them at the highest quality, and that the more we are preventative, the less expensive it is overall. But as we start to see these final numbers roll in, like, I haven't been able to keep track in my head, but the tally's starting to feel really, really, really big at this moment in time. So that might be something, if we can squeeze in some of those places, that might be helpful. So just a thought, maybe 3 million a year instead of 3.5, not something ginormous, but that, that's $1 million off the budget, and we're probably going to have to start shaving millions off the budget at some point. Thanks.
We need to extend. Thank you, Lita. How long do we think? We got quite a bit. 30 minutes? Hour? What? Okay, so do 1 hour. I think I need somebody to.
I move that we,
Thank you.
that we extend our meeting until 11 o'clock. Second.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
5-1. We will extend until 11. Whew. And then I did have, I think for me, I'm still a little bit confused on the senior programming. I'm like, are we giving that volunteer organization money? Because my thought was we would find a contractor to do the services. So I think I'm a little confused. Like, I don't mind increasing the money, but I think that decision might need to be made because
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think the approach was to have the Human Services Commission go out for RFP essentially and have organizations that currently presumably provide said services come in and present. My initial thought is to ask them what they might present, given whatever the amount of money is, what they might actually be able to accomplish, rather than presupposing what that might be. And then, as has been pointed out in the past, we currently and are continuing to reserve Beaver Lake Park. We're getting requests for use for that park during the day, and during the week, but we have not approved any of those because we've been holding that time slot for use as for lack of a better term, for a senior center. So I think that's the combined approach, is to say the space is available and they're looking for somebody to come in and provide some service based on what they would propose.
And has that been used?
Beaver Lake Lodge?
Yeah.
Not to date, no.
Okay. All right. That's helpful because I think kind of what you were saying, Councilmember Stewart, about like being able to reimburse that money, not an upfront, but I guess I don't know. But hopefully that's why we have commissions to help us out. Okay, are there any other questions on this item? Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, if we're going to put out an RFP, I don't like the idea of putting out an RFP and say, hey, we got a pile of money, what will you give us for that? I feel like we should be putting out an RFP saying, here's what we want, and then see who can come back and provide. We don't know what we want. Well, I think if you offer people a pile of money, they're going to spend it all, and you may or may not get what you're looking for. So I think it's important that we identify what it is we want and need, and then see who comes in with a bid, as opposed to just offering up money, because we don't know how much those things should cost, right? And so we're not going to get competitive bids. It's going to be kind of backwards, if you ask me.
Deputy Mayor Lamb?
I meant if we increased the money, it was more specifically to the actual programming versus increasing the money for the RFP.
Councilmember Indapure?
Yeah, I concur with that. I think I think the RFPs that will go out, and I think there are lots of organizations around here who have done this kind of programming, and I know the Human Services Commission especially is very well versed in looking at nonprofit organizations. So I don't think we'll have that challenge. I definitely understand your concern, but I feel like if we lowball our funding for the senior center, we're just not going to get good quality of work or good quality of programming that we expect for our seniors.
Oh, yeah, and under no circumstances was I recommending that we lowball it. It was more what the city manager said, where he said, we'll say, hey, we've got X amount of dollars, what can you give us for that? I felt like that was a little bit on its head, and that we should come up with some criteria of what is it that our seniors need and want. We know days and times and things like that, so I think we should provide those parameters and then ask for bids and see what people come back with. So that was all I was suggesting. Thanks.
All right, Councilmember Howe.
Sorry, I just have a general question. So if the seniors wanted to reserve the Beaver Lake Lodge today, they would just get in touch with Anjali's team? Is that correct?
Yes, however, I think the current challenge of anyone that has proposed to do senior programming, because an organization would essentially have to, for lack of a better term, rent the facility, even if we only charge $1, that they take the responsibility for the facility, because we don't have any facility monitors to come in and take care of that facility. We only open it up based on a rental basis.
Okay, but the Sammamish seniors could be that entity that rents it, say, for $1 a day. But they could move ahead and have a meeting there, for example, now, right?
Again, as long as they meet the criteria for renting the facility, then yes.
Insurance, okay, got it, thank you.
All right, I think we are good to go. Awesome. Thank you all. I think you guys are done, except Audrey. Just stay. Good night to everyone else, and except Mike too. Okay, we'll move on to establishing city council goals with Mike.
Thank you, Council, and good evening once again. Mike Suggs, Senior Management Analyst for the City Manager's Office. You'll just give me a moment to share my screen. Try and move through this as expeditiously as possible. I know it's late. Okay. All right, so we'll be taking a look at updated draft City Council goals. You'll recall just very briefly that the goal setting retreat on August 30th revealed 7 common goal areas among all of our council members, which are shown here on the slide. For each of those 7 areas, we've developed draft goal statements based on your feedback at the retreat. And we first reviewed these draft goal statements at your meeting on September 20th, 2 weeks ago, and received a lot of great feedback. So with that feedback, we revised the goal statements, and that's what we're here tonight to review. If council is prepared tonight, we do have a resolution that's attached to the agenda bill that can be formally used to approve the goals. If council has small tweaks tonight, you can adopt the resolution as amended with the small changes. If there are significant changes to the goal statements, we may need to work on those and come back for approval at an upcoming meeting. All right, so we'll start by looking at the first area, the environment. This draft goal was updated to incorporate your feedback from September 20th, and it now reads, protect and enhance the natural environment and address climate change through development of citywide policies, initiatives, and actions that ensure a sustainable future. And it was updated this way because we heard that there was a desire to reflect that in addition to protecting the natural environment, that we also wanted to enhance what we currently have, for example, with tree canopy. So this updated statement includes the word enhance. Also, the previous draft only called out the development of sustainable practices, but we heard feedback that this should be expanded to cover essentially everything the city does. So we've called out the citywide policies, initiatives, and actions as part of this revision. I'll also note that Exhibit 2 in the agenda bill includes the revisions shown in track changes. So if you'd like to see the specific wording changes, you can take a look at that exhibit. And I'll go ahead and pause here if there's any feedback on the revised environment goal statement.
All good? Deputy Mayor Lamb?
There was a good public comment that came in to add the words "if appropriate" before "enhance." I think that's a good call because it may not be appropriate. It could be cost prohibitive or for any number of reasons. But I think that adding those words "if appropriate" would be appropriate.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Is that a minor enough change?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I think we're good there, though I cannot see Zoom, so if Councilmember Treen's hand is up, please somebody let me know.
His hand
I'll
was
be
up. but it
fine.
looks like
I'll be
it's-
fine with it. It's good.
Excellent.
It's not gonna
Okay.
change the world.
Shall we move on,
I
Mayor?
didn't totally catch that, but I think we are good to move on to 2.
All right, there was no feedback on the trust and transparency goal statement, so no changes were proposed here. And I will go ahead and move on to our next slide, but please stop me at any point if there are questions. The safety goal area was updated to incorporate council's feedback from the 20th. It now reads, maintain a high level of public safety and build citywide resilience through proactive public engagement and coordination with community partners focusing on preparedness, prevention, and mitigation. There was a lot of council feedback on this original draft 2 weeks ago, so we went back and tried to capture your intent here with this revision. The updated statement tries to get at the idea of preparing and communicating with our residents proactively where possible, and also coordinating with our community partners in police and fire, as well as nonprofits, faith-based, and other organizations, so that when an issue does arise, we will have those connections and can mount a coordinated response. And with that, I will pause here for any feedback.
Deputy Mayor Lamb, is that from Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I don't have a concern with this one per se, other than it feels like it reads more like emergency management only. And when I think of public safety, I think of things like, you know, our safe routes to school programs and lighting and sidewalks. Like, it isn't just about emergencies. And so I don't know if everyone else thought of it that way as well. And if this statement is broad enough to reflect that, or if it's more focused on that sort of waiting for the disaster or something to happen.
Councilmember Napure?
I was just going to respond to Councilmember Stewart's comment. I think the word prevention and mitigation kind of encompass other things. I know the first word is preparedness, so yes, it kind of, we focus on emergency preparedness, but I think with prevention and mitigation, I think it encompasses the goal that you're aiming for.
Excellent,
And I
thanks.
think, especially because I think Councilmember Stewart and how as well you've emphasized school safety, I think we can get that as part of, you know, the lower level goals or actions. So I think we can incorporate that there. Thanks.
All right, I don't see any other people.
Fantastic. All right. Moving on to our fourth area, the DEIB goal was updated to read, advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in a measurable way throughout the community and in the city government's policies, projects, and services. The verb at the beginning was changed from promote to advance in response to council feedback. And the statement also calls out the measurement piece that was discussed on the 20th. Additionally, the previous draft used the catch-all phrase, quote, all aspects of city government, end quote, and there was a request for more specifics here. So it now calls out a few specific areas, including policies, projects, and services. And so I'll stop here if there's any feedback on this one.
Councilmember Howe?
But we need to add hiring.
We gently shut down Councilmember Howe. We're capturing hiring in policies as well, if that's okay. I think we're good.
Okay, excellent. There was a lot of discussion about the draft housing goal at the last meeting. Based on that discussion, we've simplified the statement to read, facilitate housing alternatives that meet a diverse range of incomes and needs. As the interim city manager noted at the last meeting, we are moving into some intensive work on the housing action plan that will feed into our subsequent work on the housing element of the comprehensive plan. So the cart is a bit ahead of the horse on this one in the sense that it would be ideal to create this goal after being informed by that work. So the intent with this simplified statement is really to leave every option open with the understanding that the goal can be clarified as we move forward through that work. And with that, I will pause for feedback.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I do have some changes I think we should make. For one, I'm not sure we should even use housing alternatives. I think it should be options. Just because it's not just that we need alternatives, like things we have today might be fine, we just don't have enough of them, right? So I don't know that it's about finding alternatives, that might be it. So I would say we want to promote housing options that adequately meet all economic economic income levels, demographic groups, and workforce housing needs. That would be my recommendation. And that's probably not a small tweak, Mike.
Is that the, excuse me, Councilmember Stewart, is that the change that you had proposed over email?
It is, except I actually made one more change, which is housing options instead of alternatives. But it is the one I sent an email, if that helps.
Okay, that is helpful.
Is there anyone else? I'm actually good with just changing alternatives to options instead of, because I think range of incomes and needs kind of hits that.
I would agree with that, Mayor.
Councilmember DePure?
Oh, I was just going to agree with you, Mayor. I think, the range of incomes and needs encompasses, again, the couple distinctions they're trying to make. And again, I think if we, again, just specifically call out workforce housing, then I think there could be other kinds of housing that we haven't called out. And I think, again, that could be part of our policies. But this, I do like the word options instead of alternatives as well. And I think if we just keep that, we can flesh out that in the goals. So I'm fine with.
How about promote instead of facilitate?
Is that all right, Mike?
Sorry.
I don't know if you actually caught clarity there. I mean, so my proposal was just changing alternatives to options. I had a couple people agree verbally, and then that's about, I don't know. Okay, I see head nods now. We are good with that.
Excellent. So we will modify this to say facilitate housing options that meet a diverse range of incomes and needs.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. All right, just two more here. Financial sustainability only required one simple edit based on the council's feedback, which was the addition of the word reliable to the phrase diverse and reliable revenue sources. And any questions or comments on that small tweak?
Looks good to go.
Great. Last but not least, under the transportation area, we redrafted the goal so it now reads, develop a holistic transportation system that accommodates all modes of travel and is both environmentally and financially sustainable. There was feedback at the last meeting that sustainability can have two different meanings from an environmental and maintenance standpoint. So we've tried to reflect that here. And as with housing, transportation is such a large topic that we wanted to keep the goal broad enough to allow latitude for upcoming planning work in this area. And with that, I will pause for any feedback.
Councilmember Napure?
I just have a question. Should it be transportation systems or just a transportation system?
I don't know if that question was for me, but I think you could probably write it either way. We've written it singular here as though it's kind of the city of Sammamish's holistic transportation system, recognizing the word holistic, recognizing that it's interconnected. So it connects to our park system, our school system, et cetera. So that's kind of the rationale for using the singular form of that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart?
I know I'm going to be difficult, but I actually like the term mobility instead of transportation, because I think when we say transportation, people automatically think about like cars and buses, and we really want to promote all forms of mobility. And I think instead of then emphasizing all modes, I think we need to throw in some of our equity. So I had proposed that we develop a holistic mobility system that equitably addresses community and regional needs in both, and that is both environmentally and financially sustainable.
I like that.
So for me, I don't know what that means anymore.
So
develop holistic mobility that means
system. It's developed. So instead of just saying transportation, right? It's about mobility. It's about walking, right? So we say holistic that accommodates all modes. I'm just saying get rid of the that accommodates all modes and just use the word mobility instead of transportation. So fewer words. Because I think when we start talking about things, it should be a mobility master plan. How do we move people around? Not just about transportation. I don't think people think about walking as a form of transportation, for example.
I think I'm just struggling with the word mobility because I think of just like, I don't know. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this one? Deputy Mayor Lamb?
So I kind of echo what Councilmember Stewart said, that when it just says transportation, I immediately go to cars and buses, and I don't think about people that are walking and riding bicycles. So I actually like mobility. I would also be fine with multimodal as well.
That makes sense to me. Councilmember Howe?
I think that would work for me, and I like the rest of the statement about just all modes of travel. I like the clarity of it.
I agree with Lamb about the holistic multimodal systems. And then all modes of travel seems to me to kind of take care of, heck, do I have a hovering skateboard? I don't know. I could think of a lot of modes of travel that don't even exist yet. So I think it's pretty good the way it is, and just change transportation to multimodal. Thanks.
Councilmember Naboure?
Yeah, I think I think I like Councilmember Stewart's vision of saying, let's not just think like cars and buses. When we use the transportation, I think that's what we think. So I think mobility, yes, how do we move around? But I think from a larger scale, for people to understand and for us to also convey, I think multimodal is really capturing all that. So I would prefer multimodal instead of mobility.
And I don't know if we have clarity on the end. I like what the end says, only because I think kind of like, Ratuja, what you had said is a lot of this we can clarify in those smaller goals, making it equitable, addressing connectivity regionally. But if anyone else has any thoughts on that? Councilmember Stewart?
I just think when we're writing the goal statements, that having it be broad, and especially if we're really serious about equity, it needs to be built into all of these things so that it's clear at the top level that everything we do underneath that needs to have, just like we have the environmental lens, it needs to have the equity lens. And I really think that by including those words in the high-level goal statements, we don't miss it in the levels that come below. So it's just to me, it's just a way to reinforce that, because we could come up with a lot of multimodal systems that are not equitable at all. And I would hate for that to, I know that wouldn't be our intent, but hopefully these goals will have legs longer than ours, so.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing with that, then I feel like we'd have to add equitable to all of the goals, is my only concern. But yeah, what do you all think about I think it's in Pam's email to us if you guys want to take a look and decide on that.
What if you just added the word develop a equitable, holistic, multimodal system?
That would work. Yeah, develop an equitable.
Yeah, because I almost think
multimodal
holistic
system.
is equitable. It's
Yeah.
holistic. It's looking at my whole body. There's a lot of good in that word. But what if you just add the word develop an equitable, holistic transportation system? Might work.
Could I propose
Yes,
maybe placing it
please.
in a different
Yeah.
spot? What if we said develop a holistic multimodal transportation system that equitably accommodates all modes of travel?
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, love it. Ship it? Yes, okay. Shipped. Yeah.
We're good on this one?
Yeah, and I don't know if that was minor enough, but yeah, thank you
It
so
was.
much for helping us.
Absolutely.
Oh, Councilmember Howe, I'm sorry.
You're not that sorry. The only thing, Mayor, you actually made a lot of sense when you said that we should have, equity and probably sustainability and climate in every goal, but we can't do that. But we absolutely can have a preamble before any of these that just says that we look at all of our goals through an equity and sustainability lens. And then that's just above all of the goals that just filters down through. So that's a workaround to try to bring that lens forward through the rest of the goals. Just an idea.
Cool. I think we're good then on this one. Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. So next we have.
Nope. I
Oh, we
would
have
like to make a
approve it.
motion.
Sorry, yes, please do.
We're gonna wrap this thing up, man. We're gonna bring it home. Let me get I would like to make a motion that we approve the resolution in our, God bless, it's not touchscreen. What is it? 2022-969, as written with the verbal amendments agreed to.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Please no.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, 6-0, those are approved, or that resolution is approved. Thank you so much, Mike. I really
very
appreciate
much,
your
Council.
work. Okay. Whew, now we are on to new business. Supplemental agreement number 4, George Davis Creek. I believe this will be going back to Audrey.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Again, Audrey Sarcy, Interim Public Works Director. With me presenting this item is Toby Kanan, our Senior Project Engineer in the Stormwater Team of Public Works. We will just try to keep it as quick as possible. I know it's getting late, but this is just for a supplemental contract for the design phase of the George Davis Fish Passage and Storm Improvement Project. So I will be sharing my screen tonight, and Toby will be speaking to slides. Whenever you are ready to go ahead.
Okay. Now, can folks hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And do some juggling here on my own. Bear with me. Okay. Well, thank you. As Audrey said, I am the project manager for the George Davis project. We wanted to discuss a contract amendment our design consultant, PBS Engineering, needs to complete in order for the final design. Let's move to the next slide. Supplemental agreement would typically land on the consent agenda, but because of the magnitude of this, we felt that it was appropriate to provide a brief explanation to council. Our goal this evening is obviously for council to authorize this contract amendment. Briefly, PBS began design work following council's initial authorization in June of 2019. At that time, we believed that we'd be in construction the next summer. That was obviously a rather rosy and optimistic projection that wasn't borne out in fact, and we've experienced multiple delays since then. In response to that, we've added an additional work. We've had 3 contract amendments, and now we're currently contemplating a 4th here. We're targeting construction for the spring of 2024. And in order to make that happen, PBS worked with the city to determine what exactly is needed to complete the design. That additional effort, as I noted, is described in supplemental agreement number 4, and it totals roughly $300,000. Next slide, Audrey. This table breaks down the different contract elements for the design phase of the project. We listed the date the council or the city manager okayed each contract element, and as well as the dollar value. With supplemental agreement 4, this is the one we're considering tonight, this will represent roughly 29% of the total design contract. The next slide will discuss where we are getting some of our funds. The city received a significant grant from the Brian Abbott Fish Barrier Removal Board. This is one of 22 state grant programs administered by the Recreation and Conservation Office. The grant we do have will pay up to 85% of our design costs with a maximum cap of $722,000. When we apply the grant to the contract elements shown, the funding splits roughly 70 to 30 for state to city ratio of funding. Next slide. I think the obvious question we're all asking really is, why have costs gone up $300,000? That is a fair question. The agenda bill identified 4 basic buckets to help explain these costs. One of these buckets is significant enough that we broke it down further. At this point, it's late. I don't know if we want to dive into all the details of these, but 2 that I would point to, the technical review, which accounts for roughly 25% of this, is driven by the technical review committee that represents our funding. They've got a group that is comprised of multiple state and federal agency personnel, and they have gone over our design with a fine-tooth comb. And we're continuing to, navigate some of those comments and design suggestions. Another one that I wanted to point to is the increased complexity of the project due to some of the space constraints, as well as some of the requirements imposed by the technical review committee. We're finding it necessary to redesign a significant amount of the structural work needed to, kind of get this to fit into the tight geography that we have. And that's bumped costs up significantly. I think with that, we'll look to the next slide. I wanted to talk real briefly on what happens if council doesn't authorize a contract amendment. We've outlined what that would look like, and obviously impacts what would happen with that. Our recommendations here tonight, obviously, is for council to authorize the city manager to execute the supplemental agreement and allow PBS to complete the final design. That's the extent of our prepared remarks here. We included a lot of information with the agenda bill, so if you do have questions, please let us know here.
Great, thank you, Toby. I will open it up for questions. Oops, Deputy Mayor Lamb.
So the request is for $300,000-ish, and at this point, I am a little uncomfortable with the request, simply because when I look at the overall cost of the project at $7 million, I think there's still some unanswered questions as to, can we get more, state grants? What are the alternatives to having this project done in a different way, in that it wouldn't be as expensive? So I'd just like some additional information, not to delay it a lot, but just enough to get some additional information.
No, that's certainly understandable. The The city did apply for a second grant from the Fish Barrier Removal Board that I think is in the amount of 1.2 million. That grant will be ultimately determined through the state budgeting process. And that, you know, the total limit of the request is unknown at this time. You know, the city's, I think there's roughly $90 million of requests in the cities at about the $35 million mark, if you will, for the, you know, the total prioritized list. So that kind of puts it into perspective where we're at with that. And yeah, as far as less expensive options, the direction of this project ultimately was established through consultation with council. We did go through a fairly extensive alternatives process in the planning stage that was presented to council. And the direction that we are going was endorsed by council. So if there's a desire to revisit that, I think that's a discussion we can have, but just as some background, that's how we arrived at our current direction.
Yes, I would like to revisit that. I'm concerned about, you know, just as we're seeing here now that costs are increasing and there's still, to me, it seems like there's some unknowns. And if the costs keep increasing, then we may be in a position where we're just way down the line and we would have spent a lot of money.
I understand that.
Councilmember Howell.
Is there such a thing as a drop dead date? I mean, you basically, in one of your slides, you were saying that, you know, costs could go up $450,000 or something like that. By when? I mean, what is that date?
Yeah, in discussing this with our consultant, we're looking at essentially the end of the year. I think if we extended anything beyond that, we would essentially be, you know, jeopardizing construction possibly in 2024 and, you know, compelling it to slip to 2025. And that's where that $450,000 cost premium comes in. So for all intents, we have a couple months, you know, to spare, if you will. There's a number of things that we would like to continue to move forward. You know, our grant reporting has some obligations that are, you know, identified in this agreement that we'd have to work out independently. And that may require us to come forward with a lesser request, you know, just to address some of these comments the technical panel has made. We'd have to work with our consultant and figure out exactly what that might look like.
Okay, because it could be that there's a way forward with us being able to collect our questions and rapidly being able to reach a conclusion. That's my belief.
Councilmember Napure.
Toby, just a quick clarification. You said 85% of our design cost is covered by a grant, right? And so the 305, all the supplemental costs that were listed, is it fair to assume that most of that is covered by the grant?
The current amount, roughly $100,000, would be covered by the grant for this current supplement, and then roughly $200,000 would be an obligation of the cities.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, the original cost share anticipated roughly an 85 to 15% split between grant and city funding. And with the additional work required, largely because of the, you know, time extension, that this has dragged on an extra 4 years, that split's reduced down to roughly 70-30.
Sorry, another quick question. Can you elaborate on the grant funding reporting aspect and the timeline sort of associated with that?
Yeah, we have regular updates, progress reports we have to make. And, you know, one of which was due October 1st. And we've had discussions with them in terms of what explicitly they were expecting. And they do want some additional feedback to our responses for from the technical review committee. And some of that work is just not included in the current design. There's a significant amount of discussion about, get into the technical nuts and bolts, but, sediment transport, for example. And while we do have some basic modeling, the reporting of it and those types of things were never anticipated with our design contract. So those are the types of additional things that may be necessary simply to complete the reporting to the grant agency. And those are, it's not quite so black and white as I've expressed it, but, there's a discussion we need to have with our consultant and then subsequent follow-up with the grant authority to kind of iron out what that ultimately could look like on an interim basis.
And then you mentioned in your last slide, if we don't approve this, the project stalls or the stops, we sort of have an awkward relationship maybe with King County. How does the tribe fit into this? Because I saw that a big part of our input was also, provided by the tribe. How does that affect our relationship with the tribal partners?
There's really two tribal partners of consequence that have participated in this. The first, obviously, is the Snoqualmies. This creek, George Davis was a Snoqualmie tribal member. There's a significant connection there. They have obviously been working, arm in arm with us just to, keeping tabs on this. They have, far more at stake with restoration of Kokanee than we do. This is their, birthright, so to speak. The other partner is the Muckleshoot Indian tribes, and one of their members is kind of noted authority, who's consulted rather by the Army Corps of Engineers as well as a technical review committee for our grant partner. And he's basically the expert. He's a doctorate, and he is the one that knows what Fish Passage needs. And he'll be the first to admit that this is an evolving science. And one of the things that we've encountered is that, the requirements and expectations that he's expressed have evolved during the course of this project. So, we're running kind of a balancing act here with trying to, gently push back as appropriate where we feel, the city's interests aren't entirely realized by some of these requests. But nonetheless, I think, both partners, both tribal partners, they're fish first, and we kind of ignore that at our own peril.
Thank you.
So I think you're looking for direction here. I am comfortable with moving forward, but it doesn't seem like everyone is. So I'm trying to think of like when a good time would be or what needs to be answered to be able to make this decision. I don't know if anyone has input or thoughts or if they would like to see it coming back again or what we can do.
Can we just submit questions?
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we can, in terms of direction, should we assume that it would be brought forward in the second October regular session? Questions are answered.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. Why don't we plan for that? Why don't we go ahead and table it for tonight? We will plan to bring it back in a couple of weeks, and in the meantime, council members can submit their questions. We'll try to get them answered, and then we'll try to take a little bit of a temperature check and make sure we're on the right path.
Great, thank you. I think you guys
Do you need a formal motion for that then?
Oh,
Because I'd
yes.
be willing to make that.
Do we?
I believe there was consensus, so I don't think a formal motion is needed.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I believe you guys have the next ordinance as well.
We do. Thank you, Mayor. Hopefully this will be a very quick presentation as well. Both Toby and I will be presenting this. I will go ahead and share my screen, and we are looking for council to allow us to make a small modification to our addendum to our drainage manual, and that modification would take place via ordinance. So I will let Toby go into the details here while I share my screen.
All right, thank you, Audrey. All right, as Audrey said, we are contemplating a minor rule change in our stormwater standards. So next slide. As part of the city's NPDES requirements, the city adopted new stormwater standards last summer. The rule went into effect in June. This included King County's surface water design manual and an addendum that the city typically makes to reflect specific city requirements. And we're asking council to adopt an ordinance that would change the city addendum, specifically allow PVC pipes to be used in certain circumstances. So next slide. Our adopted standards don't allow PVC pipe at the moment, and we'd like to change that for the following circumstances. Internal parts to these manufactured treatment facilities that we use, private drain systems, and then finally roof and footing drains. The city under this approach would continue to not allow PVC pipe to be installed in city rights of way in those types of locations. Next. So we're seeking this change in response to a couple factors. As I noted, the city uses a stormwater kind of a cartridge filter for the water quality improvement. And those are all pre-manufactured. They come with PVC, and there's really not a viable alternative. Second is that I think a blanket prohibition would conflict, with other standards such as a plumbing code when we're talking about roof drains and footing drains. There's widespread use of PVC, obviously, throughout the city and other applications. And there's a couple other, reasons there as well. Next slide. So with that, we would like council to forward with the ordinance adopting the use of PVC on conditional basis. We're happy to answer any questions specific to this.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart?
I move that we adopt an ordinance to modify the previous ordinance, which was 2022-541, which would allow PVC pipe in limited use where alternative materials are not readily available or inferior to PVC, as specified in the amended Sammamish addendum attached in our agenda packet.
Number 543. I will second that. Any discussion? All
No,
those in-
appreciate the presentation.
Cool. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Great work. I think you get to go now.
Thank you, council.
Yeah, thank you so much.
you.
All right,
Thank
see you all. This is next. Is this going to you, Scott?
The city attorney's going to take this one. Thank you.
Great.
So good evening, council and everyone. My name is Carrie Sand. I'm your interim city attorney. And before you tonight is a very straightforward housekeeping ordinance to align the Sammamish Municipal Code regarding anti-harassment civil protection orders with state law. So last year, the state legislature passed a bill that went into effect on July 1st, 2022. And this bill updated the state law to improve the efficacy and accessibility of the laws related to civil protection orders. So at the request of the city prosecutor and the King County District Court, I prepared the ordinance before you. And I do recommend that it be effective immediately upon passage because we've been out of sync with state law since July 1st. And so there is a declaration of emergency in this ordinance to have it go into effect immediately. And with that, then the Sammamish Municipal Code provisions would be in sync with state law. And this would obviously be helpful to avoid any legal challenges based on that current lack of harmony between the local code and state law. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I do recommend a motion to adopt this ordinance effective immediately tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
I move that we adopt an ordinance amending the Sammamish Municipal Code 9-05.430, anti-harassment protection orders to harmonize the section with recent changes to state law, providing for severability, declaring an emergency, and establishing an immediate effective date.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Thank you for bringing this forward.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, 6-0, that one passes as well. Next, we are on to council reports. Councilmember Howe?
Very quickly, I'm on the JRC, or the Joint Recommendations Committee, and so you each have a copy of the report. What I want to emphasize out of this particular report is that I've been, very unhappy with the fact that our funds are really limited and very tiny, and you have to work within HUD guidelines, which super fun, and yet we were able to supply funding to different organizations where $200,000 goes a really long way to the residents in White Center that lost everything in a fire, for example, building back businesses, getting them to a place where they were, not and looking at the question, holistically. So it's not just the people that were running the businesses; it was the landowners, because again, they're a diverse set of people in White Center, and everybody needed restitution in that case. And there are other examples of that. So this, I think, is just an example of where a little can go a long way.
Great, thank you so much. And Scott?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one quick item for council. It is my understanding that council wishes to add an executive session to the next meeting. And the next meeting has a fairly packed agenda. So my question for you all is, would you like to consider starting early to try to accommodate the consultant ahead of the start of the regular meeting, as opposed to going afterwards? So that's just a question for you all.
Yeah, thank you. Can everyone do 17th or 5:30 next week? Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Carrie?
Sorry, that would be for the 11th.
Oh, the 11th. Okay, in 1 week.
Yeah.
5:30 p.m. Yeah, good. All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
All right, moved and seconded. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you all. 6-0, we are adjourned. Have a good night, everyone. Feel better, Kent?
Getting better. Thank you.